All right, we are live. Hello, everybody. Welcome back to
Hi.
Aslightly Twisted Female. I'm your host, Brittany RouXX. I'm joined here with Laura Hobbs, who you might recognize
Hello.
from the internet. we we have a really
Personal person.
mixed crowd today. Everybody in the chat, awesome. There's literally been people in the chat ever since I posted the link. We have people kind of coming from all different parts of the internet. I've added a few extra moderators. Guys, we can debate. Let's not get my channel taken down. So let's all work
Please.
together now. All in this together. My channel's hanging on by a thread. So let's work together. Keep it respectful. Moderators, please don't censor anybody whose opinions that you disagree with. What we're looking for is like doxing and stuff that like would obviously go against like a terms of service sort of thing. Exercise putting people in timeouts, blocking only if absolutely necessary. And we're going to begin. So, Laura, why don't you introduce yourself and let everybody know who you are and where you're coming from?
Hi, I'm Laura Hobbs, also known as CommieDGurl. People know me from a lot of different sectors of the internet. I've been through a lot of different echo chambers and groups. I started off as pretty far extreme trans activist, was very much kind of I just try to push the bar, and stuff. And I was pretty extreme, and that got me a lot of hot water, a lot of negative attention. And I tried to be more in the middle, and then I ended up becoming a very like staunch trans medicalist, and then ended up becoming kind of climbing the ladder to becoming more of like a bully towards trans people and kind of anti-trans. And then I just kind of started to realize that that's not really good for me, and have started to seek fixing that and making things right for myself. And that kind of landed me in a lot of hot water with some of the more pure GCs who don't like that. Did you want me to go over like my position real quick?
Yeah. So I think what we're going to do now is, and just, I'm Brittany RouXX. For those who don't know me, I'm a women's rights campaigner. I'm a former midwife, home birth midwife. I'm a New York Department of Health breastfeeding educator, Lamaze certified childbirth educator. I'm a DONA certified childbirth doula. I'm a stillbirthday certified bereavement doula. I've worked with hundreds of mothers in virtually every birth setting, from home, hospital, birthing center. I worked at a high volume birth center in the Philippines in Taytay, Rizal. I've worked, up and down the Northeast. So my original, as an adult, I took care of a lot of, mothers and children. And it was around, I started to peak around, I think, 2020. And then by 2021, I decided that I needed to make a channel, because I was listening to people like Karen Davis from Your Kid and Right, ASTFxx, Vanessa Vokey. I knew that I had a unique perspective from my experience with birth, and I started to become aware that the birth world has been very captured. And I have my highest identity, and I talk about this, is I'm a mother. I have 4 young children. One of them who's going into middle school. And one of the first things that he said on his first day of middle school, when he came back, and he says, "Mom, it's really interesting. It seems like it's really cool to be LGBTQ plus at school. It's like all everybody talks about." And I was like, yeah, it just seems like so much had changed on the landscape. And then when I was listening to people like Aslightlytwistedfemale, and then later people like Shapeshifter and Kat Kattinson and Abel Garcia, and later Chloe Cole, these detransitioners, talking about medicalization, it really scared me. And that, coupled with, ROGD, rapid onset gender dysphoria, realizing that I have 4 young children who are coming of age in this sort of post-gender world. And, I just had recently been declared no evidence of disease after having had cancer. And I was like, I have a second chance at life here, not to be dramatic, but I was like, I need to add my own record of descent. And like, God forbid, if my cancer will ever come back or something like that, my children need to know sort of what my values were, what I stood for, what I believe in. And it's just turned into this really interesting fight. I'm really glad to have, Laura here. I think that it's really important that we have these hard conversations, you know, and everybody from both sides, people have been telling, and I'm just, you know, Laura, I'm going to use sex pronouns, like if that's okay. That's just, I'm using sex pronouns, you know, because obviously my position on gender, but I don't think exists, you know, but I think it's really important to have these conversations, and people on both sides, people were telling him not to debate me, people were telling me not to debate, and I feel like this sort of no debate is so fueled by this algorithm, and that's why we've just sort of spiraled into these extreme polarities, and we're not the ones making policy. We need to have these conversations so people can listen. All right, Laura, so tell me what your position is on, you know, gender, what is a woman, what is a trans woman, and, you know, that sort of thing.
Yeah. Okay. And then, yeah, I do have just kind of prepared to actually a statement to start off with. And just like one thing really quick, once again, I told you this already before we got on here, but I really appreciate you having me on here, despite people telling you not to. I very much believe that, you know, well, I feel like by not having the conversation, by there not being a person to have the conversation kind of more reasonable, when somebody leaves who's more reasonable, now you have to reason with more extreme people, right? And so you end up creating this echo chamber. You know, one thing that kind of got me here is I'm very much pro free speech and against compelled speech. And so I think this is crucial. And to, instead of us going to war with each other, actually talking and understanding each other. I need to let everybody know, like, I'm not leaving because of you. Like, people thought I was really upset with you or something. There's, you know, being a public figure is kind of sketchy after a couple of years. I was a little upset about the incel comment that one morning because that's my detransition picture. 4 years into detransition, that's the state I was in. I feel like sometimes people see a picture and they've had a story all made up already, and something like that kind of worries me about, you know, the other side, like how they treat detransitioners. And I've been friends with detransitioners and I've seen them feel objectively used and just kind of like, well, that's just how it is. We get used, you know. I want to also tell everybody I condemn all acts of violence. There's one thing using your words, just one thing getting loud, annoying. But when you start doing violent things like, you know, breaking stuff inside of a GameStop or pouring tomato juice on someone's head you don't like, that is an act of violence, and we need not do stuff like that. So please do not take things in your own hand that way. So what I'm here to argue today is a couple of things. I believe that trans women are a type of woman, and that this has quickly become a more utilitarian way to use the word women, because ironically, by us constantly arguing and debating over this, I think that enough people believe that trans women are women to justify its usefulness, at least, you know, with enough people that holds some utility. I was kind of thinking that's what I was going to argue even at first. And so since you decided to kind of open it up more to the true trans debate, which I actually kind of love that, because that allows us a chance to go over these different kinds of ways of looking at the different trans definitions, qualifiers. And the one thing that's a really big deal to me is the validation seeking hierarchy that I believe that I've been through this whole journey of mine. From both sides, there is this hierarchy of validation that people can climb. And you can find yourself in a lot of different echo chambers trying to climb validation. And I think that's a lot of the problem here.
Yeah. So I agree that there is this sort of hierarchy. I mean, we talk about like the oppression Olympics, and you know, in a lot of ways, people see, for example, you know, trans women or trans identifying males as sort of flip flopping their position in society from, you know, being sort of at the top. You have these white Western males who we know control the vast majority of the Earth's wealth. You know, women as recently as the 1960s were not even allowed to open a bank account without a husband or a father, and it couldn't be in their name. They couldn't control their own family's wealth, let alone, you know, now global wealth. We know that the top Fortune 500 CEOs, a tiny fraction of them are women. So it's sort of, I think, I think where people sort of see that as now it's sort of been like the top of the totem pole has flipped to the bottom, and that's sort of an exercise of privilege, that you can go into a space that's been carved out now that we recognize that there are people who are oppressed, and we've sort of analyzed history, and we're able to have these conversations, and greater accessibility to the plight of different people, and that we've gone and we've had these human rights movements and created protections in society, so that the men who really colonize the top of the totem pole are able to then go and colonize what is effectively the bottom of the totem pole, but voluntarily, whereas people are there because they have no other choice but to be there, because that's been their position in society, because of things that are outside of their control. And my question to you is, I would be hard pressed to imagine that, men who do identify as trans women, in the West, who are, whether it's middle class, I'm sure, we all have our different struggles. I know that, they say that trans identified people have difficulty with employment and housing and things like that. But in a place where there's truly systemic oppression of women, like in Afghanistan, like in, child brides in India and things like that, those aren't places where we're seeing this mass move of men choosing to occupy these oppressed spaces. What is your take on that?
So I think there's definitely at least a point in transition where just going back to that male privilege doesn't really work out. I started transitioning at 21, and then when I detransitioned, part of my whole plan was to go back to having this male privilege, to be successful finally in life and finally get a decent job and get the insurance to get the surgeries and stuff. That did not work out for me. I ended up continuing to be broke, continuing to have struggle with places to live. I think that another thing is I never really experienced that privilege. So I think kind of like person to person, it's not the same as like a generalized demographic. And then on top of that, I believe that dysphoria is very real, and we don't choose to have that. And if anything, I feel like my retransition, for me, I didn't have much of a choice. I just, I see what you're saying about people Caitlyn Jenner, these people who are top of the food chain who then transition as people who still maintain a lot of privilege and everything. And this is kind of where I get into the more specifics. So I made a claim here, and I wanted to see how people would react that, trans women are a type of woman that I feel like is categorization that is accepted with enough people that people can say that without just being a liar. They believe that. More specifically, what I've said in the past is trans women are trans women. So that's more specific and kind of more just.
So what defines a trans woman? I think that we've had a lot of conversations about what a woman is, and we know that a woman is an adult human female. I mean, there's arguments to the contrary, but we know. I mean, essentially, again, if you're talking about even in the term transsexual, right? We're talking about changing of sex. I mean, it's inherent in our sexual biology. We are a phenotype. There are two phenotypical layouts, in human biology, right? And there's male and female. So we know that if we know that a woman is an adult human female, what then is a trans woman if you exist in a male body?
Right. So there's a lot of nuance here, and this is where things get, very controversial and very mixed up. And I had to really think about this one too, because I want to give you a good answer. Is that I'm not. There's several just different ways that people categorize the two classifications that we typically think about. And biology, typically things are either male, female, or eunuch. Okay, and it's not necessarily based on the chromosomes, it's based off the gametes. And so in males typically have a smaller gamete or none. Females produce a larger gamete. In that classification, we would probably be more considered, trans women would be more considered eunuchs or gams. If you get into, like, I'm sure we might touch into a little bit of Blanchard at some point, gynoandromorphs. And that would be that classification system. If we were going to go the route of, I'm sorry.
So can humans change sex? I mean, if we're saying, if inherent in the term transsexual, right? Transition, sexual, we're talking about like biological sex, right?
Right.
And we know that we're going to go in later to transgender versus transsexual. We're talking about transsexual. What then is a transsexual woman? Because can human beings change sex? If not, then transsexual is inherently a misnomer. Then by definition, it would be a transgender. And then we'd have to get into whether or not gender exists. Then what is gender? Right. And for one to become, eunuchs and things like that, again, these are still self-imposed transitions. These are self-imposed states, and it doesn't erase the fact that one is capable of producing, either large or small gametes. So definitionally, what do can human beings change sex? And then if so, or if not, what does that mean for the term transsexual?
Right. So technically, if we're going by the biology, that's where it goes down to the gamete. We're gonna know for sure, right? Like the biological sex. And so you're gonna get that one. But where I'm getting at is that, are you gonna check my gametes for me to enter a restroom? Obviously not. And so when it comes to, there's different approaches to how we analyze this word in linguistics. And next one over, I would say, is just like, does this word serve any kind of utility? Does it provide any information? So like gender abolitionists will just, I'm sorry, they want to erase sex, right? And it's blank slate, right? How do I consider someone actually trans?
Kind of one thing that you said is if they're going to check gametes, but no one has ever checked gametes, and we as a society have always organized ourselves as male and female, right?
So how do you recognize that?
Visually.
Right. And that's good enough.
I mean, visually, but not just visually. I mean, through audio, through hearing somebody's voice. I mean, through their gait, through the way that they walk, through, I mean, there's, you have to understand, as women, because we are the gatekeepers of human reproduction, right? You have to understand, men can have 100 different women pregnant at any given time because you're small gamete producers. You create hundreds of thousands, about millions of sperm throughout your life. Women are only capable of fertilizing something. I think we have like maybe 100 viable eggs throughout our lifetime. And with every menstrual cycle, we lose one of those viable eggs. The egg, travels down. It makes itself available for fertilization. Fertilization doesn't, the womb prepares itself for the potential fertilization. If fertilization doesn't happen, it sheds itself. It's a 28-day on average cycle. Whereas during that time, you might have been making, tens of hundreds of thousands of small gametes. This is a very, long process for just one of our gametes. And then this sort of commitment that happens if one of those is fertilized, then it turns into another 18-month period, 9 months of carrying and gestating that baby, giving birth, and another 18 to, up to 24 months for our bodies to return to our pre-pregnancy state in terms of, so there's so much. I mean, sort of say that, gametes is sort of an inconsequential thing. Right. And I think that what were you just saying? I kind of forgot.
how do we recognize that someone's male or female? The point I was getting is that you observe, right?
So what I would just, and just to finish what I was saying, the reason why we can recognize so easily and so well what a man looks like, and recognize, that there's something off about something, is because we have hundreds of thousands of years. You got to understand, the sex binary developed in mammals, and developed. I'm sorry, the sex binary developed in organisms before the brain did, right? So I mean, we've been, a binary thing for such a long time, and we've had to develop. Again, we have to defend that fertility, because every single sexual encounter with a male prior to birth control, which came out in the 1960s, could result in fertilization and conception. And we didn't have, this is prior to birth control, this is prior to abortion. That would turn into what was then a 24-month commitment, and then to birth, gestating and breastfeeding that baby, and then another 18 years of committing our resources, our body, our time and attention. And we can't just have that ripped out of our hands. That's why we have biological gatekeeping. That's why we've evolved to be able to identify a threat, which is men, other men. If you look in animals, it's always the female animal who has to kind of like protect herself, and the male animals are coming, and they're like jumping around, and they're trying to find different ways to get through that gate. But as women, we have to gatekeep. That's why we do have such a honed sense for who is male and who is female, because it's theoretically a threat.
Right. I can definitely observe a man who looks more threatening versus, like, I mean, if you're scared of this, like, I'm sorry, I'm not that tough, but like, no, I don't think anybody serious is denying that there's a biological difference between males and females here. Why
do trans women then, if you're saying that you're not a threat and that women in the bathroom should not be concerned when they see you and they identify you as male, why then do you need to be in the woman's bathroom if you don't think that, men inherently, you think that trans women are somehow have just a natural less of a threat, pose less of a threat as a whole? And if so, on what basis do you make that claim?
Okay. So I too can observe men being more of a threat, and that's why I don't think it's fair for trans women to have to put themselves in the danger of, like, I mean, it's like expecting me to agree that men are non-threatening and going in the men's bathroom, even though, like, I just agreed with people that men are not threatening, who were just saying that men are all dangerous. It's observation. Like, I can observe. Now, ultimately, I'm for third option. I think there needs to be a third option. I think that would solve a lot of this, is single use, third option, fully closed off. And I think that's actually a smarter way to develop buildings. Now, I've, know the argument against that is like, it's unrealistic. But at the end of the day, it's like, we work jobs for a multi-use facility. And I don't think it's fair to ask us to hold it all the time. I don't think it's fair to ask us to put ourselves in that danger. You could say, oh, I don't pass, and say that I shouldn't be in the women's restroom. But I've seen people say that Blair White should go in the men's room. And I mean, she's been dragged out of the men's room.
But do you understand though, the sort of contradiction and with all due respect, borderline hypocrisy? Your first statement was, look at me. Why would you be nervous or scared of me? But then you go on to talk about how you have what you say are a legitimate concern of fear of men in the men's bathroom. Why are we to assume because that you have long hair and makeup that you are, somehow less threatening? And I want to bring up a statistic. Let's see. I wanted to bring up one statistic to talk to that point. So it's the long-term follow-up of transsexual persons undergoing, wait, hold on. No, sorry, that's the wrong one. God. Sorry.
I mean, I don't think really that it's fair to either of us, honestly.
Fuck. All right, never mind. I'll look for it. Basically, because I want to be able to quote the studies that I'm referring to. There was a Swedish cohort that showed that men post-sex reassignment surgery, and I think that that's a misnomer because there is no such thing as a sex reassignment. I think that, you know, you can have plastic surgery on your genitals to sort of, you know, imitate the appearance of opposite sex genitals, but they're, you know, in no way are they functionally female genitals in any, you know, meaningful definition of the word. But the study has shown, after observing men who were in prison, I think in Wales and in England and in like Sweden or something, that up to, I think it was like a long-term study. I say I don't want to misquote it. I think it was like maybe like a long-term study of 10 years or something like that. But had reassignment surgery from between like 1969 to 2011, and they did these follow-ups where there was no difference in criminality between men who had undergone sex reassignment surgery and men from the general prison population. However, when they looked at trans women or trans identified males, when compared to the female prison population, there was vastly higher rates of violent criminality amongst the trans identified male cohort than there was in the female prison population. So I say that to say that there, from what we can see, there is no real reason to assume that just because somebody has a gender identity or identifies as trans, that they are somehow inherently safer. And that, you know, and if you're saying that you feel unsafe around women, then you must understand why women would feel unsafe around you. Or do you feel that you pose less of a threat to women than the men might pose to you?
I definitely, okay, so just to clarify, like, I don't think this situation is ideal for either of us. I see men as more of a threat to me than I would be to you personally in a situation like using a restroom.
Wait,
Now,
you're breaking up a
to
little bit.
clarify, I would see myself as less of a threat to you than I would think men in the men's restroom would be to me personally. Now, I don't think the situation's ideal for either of us. And there was something I wanted to go over. Huh?
Really quick though, why is that? Why do you feel that you would pose less of a threat? And not just you specifically, right?
Sure.
I mean people with your identity.
So that's the thing, is I don't agree with self-ID. Like, I'm not denying that biological sex exists. I'm saying that in certain contexts, describing trans women as women is utilitarian and is commonly understood. That's all I'm arguing, but I'm not taking biological sex away or denying it. I'm not in favor of self-ID. You brought up the prisons. You know, I when it comes to self-ID, I don't agree with the spa freaks going around flashing their wang in women's spaces. That is predation and they should be locked up. I don't agree with sports cheats. I don't agree with people cheating in sports. I mentioned to you in DMs, Ellie Ellerick was arguing with Pearl Davis about the sports issue and was bringing up these like outlier kinds of cases that, you know, some women are taller. Michael Phelps had this thing with his stomach acid that made him swim faster. They're taking these very rare edge cases and then saying that that's just like the appearance of trans women in women's sports would be that. I find that very disingenuous. I think it should even be left up to the sports organizations, but even then I can see how that's unfair to women. So I'm not denying the biology. The biology exists. But what I am saying is that me, myself, like, I don't want to dismantle women's spaces, but it's not fair to someone like me that I would have to hold it or play Russian roulette at a workplace every day, going into a multi-use restroom with men.
Have you ever
It's like asking us to risk our life because you're afraid of us. I don't think that's fair to us.
How do you not, I'm just like, how do you not see the sort of, like, with all due respect, the hypocrisy? You're calling it Russian roulette to go in with men. Have you faced violence in the men's bathroom? Again, and you know, looking at yourself.
Can I answer that?
Can I answer that real quick? Yeah, go ahead.
I have not faced violence in the men's restroom because since transitioning, I have stuck to either single use. I actually went through a couple of years where I'd only use single use a few times, and I've not gone into the men's restroom to test that because I'm not an idiot. But I want to let you know that yeah, I have been sexually assaulted and taken advantage of by men many times.
But in a public space, was it a person known to you, or was it an unknown?
No, it was in a public park. He found me passed out drunk and followed me in my car and took advantage of me. And that was recently.
Really sorry. And unfortunately, the fact of the matter is men commit the vast majority of sexual crimes. And it's so women are not.
Somebody, I'm going to point out somebody in your chat said BS. And this is exactly what I was talking about. Like we talk, like, I feel like some people on your side, like, want us to get sexually assaulted and forwarded. And these people, like,
yeah, guys, like so the personal stories and shit like that. You know what I mean? I don't, you know, I think people go through shit. You know what I mean? So we can, you know.
But, sorry, I had to push back on. I see that all the time when I bring up one of these stories, and that's something that actually piqued me out of leaving the GCs, is because one named
you have a right to push back, but women have the right to push back too. Because again, I think that you're severely contradicting yourself when you're saying you want to protect women's spaces while admitting that you use women's spaces routinely. You're saying that women. You're scoffing at the idea that women would be afraid to see a, you know, with all due respect, you know, you have a wider, you know, shoulders, and I'm a big woman. Okay, I'm 5'9". I'm like 180 pounds. Like, you know, there's not a lot of women who could take me. But there are a lot of men who are smaller than me. I know, I've felt it. I've seen it. The sort of like that upper body strength. It's incomparable. It's absolutely incomparable. I cannot imagine any woman that I've ever met who I think that would be able to take you. You know what I mean? And it's about leveling the playing field.
So what do you expect me to do?
My
question.
I expect you to use the men's bathroom. You know, as a man.
Ain't gonna happen. I'm not stupid. I'm not gonna put myself in that danger. That would be really dumb.
So you're okay putting women in danger. You're okay.
I'm not putting you in danger by going to the bathroom.
By putting women in a space where, again, they can't say no. Because you got to understand, when men are allowed to enter a woman's space, when men are allowed to enter the woman's bathroom, and when we have posted signs, like on the YMCA, they literally say, "Oh, respect everybody's gender identity. If you see somebody come into the bathroom, you know, basically mind your business. Don't say anything. Leave them alone." They are stripping women of the right to gatekeep that space and say, "Hey, sir, you can't come in here." So any man, and again, we've all heard the mantras, "We don't owe you femininity." So now, really, we have no idea who really identifies as trans or not. Anybody can walk in, and whereas before, every woman would immediately say, "Whoa, whoa, whoa! Hey, wrong bathroom, sir. Get out of here." Now we have signs telling us that we'll get thrown out, get in trouble if we say anything. So we all have to just sit there and wash our hands. What's going to happen is, and I'm a mother. I have 4 young children. I'm not putting my children in a position where I need to confront grown men about coming into a space that I don't think that they should be in. I'm not going to be changing my daughter's diaper if I know that men can just walk in at any time. When my girls get older, I won't feel comfortable with them in the public sphere, because I will know that there is no place for them in public that they can just sort of dip off to be together.
I mean, I don't agree with self-ID. I've said this several times. If somebody comes in with a beard and a big fat gun and obviously just chilling in the bathroom staring at people, like, I'll fucking throw him out. I'll punch him in the face. Like, get the fuck out of here, dude.
Nothing for that guy to shave his beard and throw on a wig and then put on like a floral shirt and suddenly now he's a trans woman, right?
If he goes into the stall and pisses or shits or whatever and gets out, there's not a big deal. I'm not advocating for us to, I'm vehemently against us going into nude spas and stuff like that. I'm against trans women just forcing their ways into women's sports. I'm against self-ID. I don't agree with bearded men just claiming to be trans women, not a day of actually transitioning or anything and going into women's bathroom and being a predator.
Let's talk about self-ID. And this goes into the sort of true trans thing, right? Because self-ID is inherently starts gatekeeping the trans identity. It's the idea that and to me, on my position, it's so arbitrary because we all got to take your word for it. It really comes down to, even when, you get a gender diagnosis and whatnot, it still comes down to self-reporting, right? You got to drive yourself to a therapist. You got to sit and answer the questions. You get to sort of tailor the responses that you give. Somebody who is driven to be able to access that, they're going to do it, and they're going to do it fairly easily. What do you define as, again, true? Who do you believe? Like, what are the parameters of what makes a trans person a legitimate trans person versus somebody that you think is just like either a transgender or somebody who's just abusing that identity to sort of, get in, whatever?
It's simple. It's observation. It's really obvious when you see somebody who's just full of shit and refuses to shave their ugly beard. And when you see someone who's been on HRT for 4 years and is making an effort, it's really obvious to me.
You know that I could literally order estrogen off the deep web right now. I could sit here when I could show everybody how to do it. So
yeah, I think it's to be gate kept. I don't agree with the affirmation model. I don't agree with self-ID.
So you're saying that anybody who makes an effort to perform femininity? Because I'm trying to understand, you got, like, when you're putting on makeup, doing your hair, wearing, quote unquote feminine clothing. This is a performance.
I'm trying to pass. I want to integrate with society. I want to be seen as normal. I don't want to be seen as a drag queen. I want to be seen as a tranny for the rest of my life. I don't want to be seen as non-binary, genderless, or a cross-dresser or gender non-conforming. I'm trying to actually pass.
But you've detransitioned. So you've gone from being a man to identifying as a woman, back to identifying as a man, back to identifying as a woman, right? So at any given point, you're still the same person. You understand?
But the difference is I detransitioned for like 4 years, stopped taking hormones, presented as a guy, let myself fall apart and get fat and grow a beard.
I think that's the problem here when women... Go ahead.
No, sorry. I definitely was not using women's spaces at that time because I wasn't presenting myself as a woman. And when I retransitioned, even, I didn't use women's spaces until years in when people were bugging me to stop, like, avoiding it.
So when you're the guy, so you were safe when you were a man and you looked like a man, you were safe then and it was all good.
Yeah, because who's gonna like R-word a big fat bearded man versus this? Like, it's very observably different the way that men and trans women are treated. I feel like a lot of times when you generalize trans women as men, you're treating as like we have the exact same lived experience. It's like this. So you don't want trans women, the statement trans women are women, to erase the biological and the growing up, the entire life experience of women. I understand that. And so that's why I'm willing to make the distinction and have in the past that trans women are trans women more specifically. But I feel like sometimes I'm doing that to like kiss up. And it's like, I don't need to be.
So you think that you're, and you don't have to answer this, but how tall are you? I'm 5'9". How tall are you?
So I'm 5'10" and a half.
Okay. So you're a tall guy. I mean, you're not like a petite. I mean, Shapeshifter's like 5'1" or 5'2". Like, he's petite. So, you're a tall person and you clearly have like, you know, some sort of a build. So
Yes.
you really believe, and especially, I mean, we're talking about like the prison thing, or we're talking about bathrooms, you're at greater risk of being assaulted. Why? Because you have long hair and you're wearing a dress than what, a petite, you know,
Because I have boobs. I have smaller frame than most males. I started at 21, and then development stops around 25. So I was on hormones till about 27. I spent 4 years of my endocrine system killing me and falling apart and dying, and I never really built up that masculinity. Look, I mean, at the end of the day, if we had third option, this would not be an issue. It's like this. It's always these things where it's like, I don't think it's fair for you, but then I don't think the resolution is to go after me. You're afraid of predators. Go after predators, not me. So when it comes to the prison system,
is that your decision to go into a woman's restroom allows for hold on. Wait, how do I get this?
enables them.
Absolutely. Again, because we're not, you know what I mean? And again, just that we know from whatever available that we have that transitioning does not make men somehow less of a threat. So your concerns are more legitimate, that you're scared and you don't care how women feel. And we're supposed to all gather around and be like, rally around you and be like, oh, of course, come on in. We understand, you know, you're this 5'10", you know, pretty like built guy with you know, broad. And I'm just saying, because upper body strength of a man, yeah, I'm, you know what I mean? Like, I'm just saying, you know, like, and so and then, you know, this is just the bathroom, right? But then when we're talking about things like caged caged people, we're talking about prisons and whatnot. So if you're scared in the bathroom, inherently, then you would probably demand to be placed in a woman's prison, correct?
Actually, no, I would be in the men's, because then they give me all their cookies and treat me like a queen.
So but that's what I'm saying. Realistically, you'd be at greater risk realistically in a men's prison. Men's prison, period. Any man is dangerous. And anybody who's listening now, go listen to my trans in prison series with Hakeem. It's somebody who's locked up, who I had a relationship with, who's like, we're super close, and we have prison phone calls, and he's explaining what it's like for trans identified males in prisons. That is a very illuminating. I mean, he talks about one of the men, and like, he's jacked up, like he's somebody that you wouldn't want to fuck around with, right? But he's talking about one of the men who sit there and he'll perform femininity and do what you're doing now, and you know, he wears makeup, and they advocated so now the men can get makeup, and they sort of cut up their t-shirts and do whatever, and you know, changes his voice. But when it's time to fight, when shit starts to go down, he goes, oh, you're gonna make me put Princess back in her fucking cage, what's up? You know, and then it's like, yeah, he like, then the man really comes out, and that's a choice. I don't get to suddenly turn on and off being a woman. I don't get to suddenly, and that's the same reason why we're not seeing TIFs, trans identified females, clamoring to go into men's prisons. They know inherently it doesn't make sense. It doesn't matter how much they've been shooting testosterone in their ass. The musculature, the skeleton, it's just not the same. They're still at a risk. And then my question to you is still, what can humans transition sex? If so, or if not, then what is the difference between a transsexual and a transgender? Because in both cases, if humans can't transition sex, then transsexual is a misnomer, correct? Then what is a transsexual?
Potentially. And see, that's what I've been trying to get to, is like, so I want to go back real quick, and then maybe we can kind of like move on from this topic, like the bathrooms, prisons, self-ID, because I'm really against self-ID. And I think that these different issues.
You're not against self-ID because you're using women's bathrooms. Now, unless you're saying that because you have a gender dysphoria diagnosis, but I don't know.
Because of that. It's because I actually transition. So true trans to me is simply someone who's actually transitioning and putting in the effort. And that's to me someone who's actually transsexual, who wants to approximate the opposite sex to a believable state, which takes time.
But how is it transsexual if people are not getting sex reassignment surgery?
So Well, and that's pushing the validation hierarchy that encourages people to get bottom surgery and regret it sometimes. I'm doing everything I can. I personally made a choice that I think that bottom surgery is a huge risk, and it's not going to give me to me, I would risk it not being perceived by myself as a real vagina, and that would be something very hard to live with. And that's a risk I don't want to take. And I don't think we should be encouraging people to try to prove validation by getting surgeries and chopping off parts of their body.
But then that's not transsexual. But you guys are the ones saying that there's a difference between transgenders and transsexuals, and that transsexuals are legitimate because they're, you know, transitioning and they're medicalizing and whatnot. But again, transsexual, sexual, meaning our primary sex characteristics, these secondary sex characteristics, men can go, your balls, your testicles make small amounts of estrogen. Every single man makes small amounts of estrogen. Every single woman makes small amounts of testosterone. Does that mean that we're all transgender? You know, some men who are overweight, their testosterone aromatizes into more estrogen, which means they have elevated levels of estrogen for a variety of different reasons that can turn into them having sort of breast tissue. Some men get breast cancer. Does that mean that they're transsexual?
Of course not.
You know, right. So where I start to like not follow anymore is you guys are saying that there is this clear, when I went on with Holly, Holly held a space, and it was like I said, you know, whatever. And I asked the same question. Please define for me what is a transsexual versus a transgender, because I hear a lot of this rhetoric that it's the transgenders are the problem. They're just self-IDing. It's just sort of like a fad for them, versus transsexuals who are actually transitioning. Then I always ask, well, did you guys have SRS? And I was like, oh, no, never that. So like, I don't understand.
So maybe I can try to help clarify. So what I mean by actually transition is you brought up like, so you can't, you know, just choose to go into man mode. Like, so one of the reasons I'm against self-ID in prisons is because I have seen those cases where you have men clearly taking advantage of the system, self-IDing in a women's prison, creating R-word gangs, and just it's hell on earth from what I've heard that situation, right? But the thing is, like, so there's those guys in prison, right, that can that they can just ID out of it all of a sudden in a moment of being threatened. Somebody who's been on hormones for a long time, or even you have mentioned shapeshifter as one of the good ones, right? Like Shape, I mean, let's just, you know, pretend someone like Shape has not.
He doesn't occupy women's spaces, and he acknowledges that he's a man.
So an argument, something that I am concerned about Shape is that if Shape were to get into legal trouble, what prison would Shape go to? And even if Shape will, whatever, I don't know where Shape stands on this entirely, but I have a feeling that Shape would be very scared in that situation altogether.
Every man has an anus. Gay men have anal sex. Every human being has an anus. Therefore, every human being is at risk of penetrative sexual assault. So a man, just because he inverted his penis and added an extra pocket, isn't suddenly, and I know, and with all due respect, I also think it's a little delusional to assume that all of a sudden the men are all going to be like clamoring to get. What is the difference between a trans-identified female who, some of these guys, you know, we're thinking of like the Laverne Cox and, you know,
people who actually transition.
Blair White and all these little like cute whatever, you know, oh, you can understand how some dudes are attracted to them. Bro, I can tell you some of the trans-identified males that are upstate are a little like a scary looking bunch. And if the idea is that they're like, the men are like, you know, beating each other down to get to these guys is deranged. I mean, I would be, you know, the little petite gay dude is probably the one that I would be like, yeah, bro, like good luck in there.
So do you care about him? So you said that I don't care about women's spaces and I'm this hypocrite that I don't care at all. You even said that you would be afraid for that person. That's what I'm getting at is,
do we put little petite gay men? Do we put all vulnerable men in with women? And then again, what are women? Are women just, what are we, the safety net for vulnerable men? No, women have their
I
own
don't agree with
issues,
that.
their own needs. Our job is not to sit here and be protective custody for either mentally ill or vulnerable men. That's not. Women don't have to sit there and sacrifice their safety, their well-being, their privacy. You have to remember, it's also privacy, right? Women don't want to sit there and know that there's a man in the space with them. Young girls who are menstruating for the first time, who have other gynecological things. When I had cancer, I had like a gynecological type of cancer, and it was like this big awkward thing, and I'm going through all this shit, and I was going through pelvic radiation, and it like hurt to sit down even on a toilet and pee, and it's already overwhelming. Again, it's a privacy issue, and I have children.
Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
No, go ahead.
Okay. Sorry. I just think that some of this stuff is getting really conflated, and this is kind of what I worry about, is that like these are different things. Like we can observe a difference between men, women, transsexuals, and straight up dishonest people just IDing into it to take advantage are very different, observably different. We can observe there's also a difference in these circumstances, like restrooms, sports, prisons. And I think there's a lot of nuance. So I would handle these situations very differently. So prisons, I think, needs entirely reformed. I think our prisons are hell on earth, and that's an atrocity. Bathrooms, if you have a trans woman working somewhere, I believe that she has the human right, because she pretty much has a gun to her head saying, you got to work or you're going to starve and die. And she has to go there every day, and she has to pick a restroom to go in. And I wouldn't want her to get hurt. And so that is where there's a difference between a bathroom and a nude spa where a guy's got his wiener out in front of a 14-year-old girl, which also, by the way, why would you take your daughter at 14 to a nude spa in downtown LA or
I don't think we're putting the onus on the mother and the child for why there's
I don't understand those spaces at all. But I don't agree with those men going in there, and they are predators for doing that.
South Korea, nude women, female. First of all, I'll say, me and my girlfriend, we love going to. There's a Korean spa. It's like this hole in the wall space in Northeast Philly. It's fully nude. You can get like massages. It's only women. It's all these like older Korean women, and they're all like hardcore, like mad cool, and it's like a little known spot. And I've seen moms go with their teenage daughters, and it's a cultural thing, and it's like we keep each other safe and everybody knows each other. So I don't think the onus is on the mother and the daughter when they thought that they were going to a female only space, only to be in like a twilight zone where now you have all of the staff that are like, oh, well, that's a woman, and everybody's like, yup. And then you have this dickhead with the fucking red beard. He's like, hey, are you harassing this lovely trans woman? Like, bro, get the fuck out of their face. And I think it's hard because, again, it's just such a different experience when you have children. So what, mothers have to stay home now? Because that's what's going to happen. If I have to change my child on a changing room and I know for a fact that it's not a female only space, you're right. I'm not going to risk my kids. That mom really believed that she was going into a female only space around other women. The vast majority of sex crimes, virtually all of them, are committed by men. So if you're going into a female only space, why would she assume that might not be, an okay, safe spot for her and her child? That's the problem. We're eroding all of that.
Right. So something I noticed here in another example, the main onus I put on this situation is these spa freaks going into these places, and I call these men predators because that's what they are. And most of the onus is on them. And I said to a smaller degree, I don't understand. Wait, can I finish this one point? Is to a small degree, I just don't understand the mentality of taking a minor to that situation at all, even when there's adult women there, because there are women who do things too that are predatorial. I don't understand that situation, but the main onus, and this is kind of where I see like some conflation going, is I was not putting the onus on the parents much at all. I was just kind of like not really understanding that mentality. I kind of am critical of it, but I'm against these men going in there and flashing their junk. So do you see where I'm like at least trying to meet you on this, and I'm trying to find like a reasonable middle ground? Like, I think that it's unfair to ask a trans woman who every day has to show up at work or she's going to starve and die on the streets, and she has to choose between a men and women's restroom. And I don't think it's fair to ask her to take that risk. But when this man decides to drive from Riverside County to downtown LA to insert himself in the wee spot and flash his penis in front of those ladies, that motherfucker deserves to be in prison.
You're breaking up, and I think we have poor connection. I just don't want them to miss your point.
So
how is that, chat? Tell me how is the audio and the video? Because somebody said that the video is blurry. Can you guys let me know how the connection is? Hold on, give it 1 second.
So I mean, we all have to work, and like Karen Davis said here, and I just don't think it's fair to put so much burden on trans women just having to take a pee while they're at work that they have to risk their getting sexually assaulted.
Is that really what it is though? Is that really the
for me? Yeah, that's
thing?
that's the thing. It's nuance, like separating these issues. I'm against these spa freaks. I'm against sports cheats. I'm against allowing these men who have these records of sexual assault, battery, R-word, everything, and then they just self-ID into women's prison. Completely against that. All I am saying is, if you guys aren't going to give us third option bathrooms, don't make us risk our life every time we go to the bathroom. I feel it's a violation of our civil rights. I'm not taking
third
option.
Option. The problem is, get third option. I think by all means, if you guys have to mobilize, this is something that you want. Get all the energy. We've seen how much energy is behind this trans thing. Mobilize it for a third option. The problem is, from a lot of the trans identifying people that I've talked to, they don't want a third option because that's not affirming, that's othering. A lot of trans identifying males like, oh, that's othering, and I'm a woman like everybody else. And you even have men like what's the bicyclist? The one cyclist says, no, I'm not a biological man. I'm a biological woman because I am a woman and I'm in a biological body. And so if I am a woman, then my body is a woman's body. So I am a biological woman. Whoever the fuck the cyclist is. Fuck, what's his name? I know, but go ahead. Didn't you have something prepared? We can shift gears for a second.
Yeah, we'll kind of move away and just respond to this if you want. I just kind of want to leave it at, like, I think this is fair to assume, to kind of like leave it at this, is that, like, I'm not in favor of self-ID. There's all these circumstances in other situations, prisons, sports, these nude spas. I don't think that it's appropriate for trans women to go into a fully nude area and flash their dick. I think that's wrong. I don't agree with these rapists self-IDing into women's prisons. I think that's all wrong. For me, can you at least understand where I'm coming from? Like, maybe not agree, but kind of see where we might feel like that's putting a lot of burden on us that we might not be willing to accept.
No,
that it's understandable that you would see that. Do you see the difference between a bathroom situation every day at work versus this predator trying to self-ID into women's prisons? It's very obvious. Or some dude flashing his junk at a nude spa. Like, I see these as very different circumstances.
No, I know what it's like to be in a bathroom and see a man come in who had a wig on and had a dress. I'm sure believed up and down that he passed. And I remember being 19 years old and that immediate feeling of freezing up and be like, oh my fucking God. Oh my God. And everybody's like, okay, hey. And again, you got to understand. A lot of these men are very mentally ill. A lot of these men, and they've been over-affirmed. You don't know what their purpose is. You don't know what they're doing. There was a man in 2019, some kid, I think he was 19 or 20, got arrested. He put on a wig and he had like dark sunglasses on and a mask. And he was in the corner of a women's bathroom jerking off. I can pull up the news for that. And yeah,
I think I should be in jail. Like, he should be put in prison right away. Like, that's hella illegal and disgusting and scary as hell.
You're saying that, again, it's, and the whole like no self-ID and stuff. I still, to this day, and I've been in several, mixed spaces where it's some TRAs and it's some, trans people who identify as transsexual with Holly, and I think you and Laura Sky, and a lot of you guys all seem to be sort of on like the Blair White umbrella, the sort of libertarian transsexual, the sort of anti, well, you have like more of like a communist, whatever, but like, you know what I'm saying? It just seems like that whole crew of people, and it's all because maybe they're better performing femininity, and maybe they look better and they're younger, and some of them can kind of like pull off as being more attractive and stuff like that. To me, it's just so arbitrary. It's just so like, again, the performance of femininity is something that is a patriarchal thing that was imposed on us. It has nothing to do with being female. We can all perform femininity, and that's already proven by drag queens. Those are all men. They claim to be men, but man, when they get dressed up, they pass too. So can they all just waltz in? Should drag queens be able to like just choose to go into?
I mean, they can just take their phone plates off and take off their wig and makeup, and they're not going to look weird. They're not going to look like, I mean, a lot of trans women, if we try to dress down, we just look like trans men, and people will think we're female still. Like, it's.
But you're not, though.
Well, I'm not denying biological sex, but I do think that trans women who are actually transitioning in certain circumstances are more at threat. And I just don't think it's really fair to ask us to put ourselves at more risk. But we're kind of starting to, I feel like, a little bit.
Well, really quick, let's talk about risk really fast. And if we're talking about like Trans Day of Remembrance, and the fact that trans women are at this like multi-fold increased risk. 2022 was the deadliest year on record for trans identifying people, and this is of all kinds. This is trans identifying females, trans identifying males, and non-binary people. Anybody who identified as trans, whether they medicalized or not. The global number of deaths during this year, again, this is the most catastrophically bloody year on record ever since they've been taking this, I think for the past 20 years or something, was 375 global murders. Guess how many of those was a hate crime? One. It was a woman in the Philippines who was a lesbian who had recently started identifying as a man. And there's a lot of conflict about whether or not it was really like a trans hate crime. There's some like evidence that, it was this personal matter and maybe had to do with like lesbophobia, whatever. It was one. The rest of people, the vast majority of the deaths happened in Brazil. They happened to people who are in the sex trade and who are involved in cartels. So if the idea that trans identifying men are being slaughtered left and right, and that there's just this like huge push, it just, to me, I'm not seeing it bear out. Whereas let's talk about Black women, for example. Black women are being killed every 6 hours. A Black woman is being murdered every 6 hours. So I'm just saying, like, if we're talking about that, women have to push aside their concerns of fear and the worry that they have about men just being able to walk on in, and we don't have a space where we can just go dip off into. And again, you got to realize, if other men or other people before all of this saw a man walking into a woman's restroom, everybody like, yo, buddy, yo, what's up? Hey, yo, what the fuck you doing, bro? Like, fuck out of here. Right now, nobody has the right to say that anymore.
I would say something. If man came in with full ass beard in the women's room, I'd be like, what are you doing? And I would say something.
But if he knew that all he had to do was pop on a wig real quick and shave,
that wouldn't work for me.
Go on a skirt, that's what. Look at Loudoun County. That guy, that kid who sodomized a 15-year-old girl. He just threw on a skirt and said he was trans, and went and anally raped a child. And it happened twice. And they didn't want the publicity, so they kept sweeping it under the rug, and then tried to spin the story as if this dad was this like crazy right winger, transphobe. I mean,
yeah, I always try to make excuses for these trans identified predators. I don't agree with that. You brought up, the sex trade victims in Brazil. Why do you think so many trans people end up doing sex work? We are pipelined into this kind of stuff. So you can look at hate crime stats, and a lot of times things that are a hate crime aren't recorded as a hate crime. But are you going to try to convince me that we are not targeted with increased violence for being trans women? Because I'm going to tell you right now, that's wrong. And that's not what my life experience tells me.
Right.
I've
And
never been sexually assaulted. Presenting as a man, presenting like this, it happens a lot. And I get harassed and all that stuff. And I've gone through a lot of my life like this. I can't just
but you're
switch.
choosing to wear, you are though, right? You're choosing to present that way. Right?
So do you
Even
think it
if,
would just be easy for me tomorrow to just go and start presenting as a man? I have to get my name changed. I have to get my breasts removed. Everybody have to get used to it. It'd be this whole process. It's not just like a simple thing that I choose. I made a choice a long time ago.
Right. But but it was still a choice, right? I'm just saying, as women, our bodies naturally develop this way. If it was such a concern of safety and things like that, why would you choose to place your, and then I guess we can kind of segue into gender dysphoria, right? Because
right, so I have dysphoria over my, I think it should be called sex dysphoria. I have dysphoria over my sex.
But if that were true, then why have you not gotten genital surgery? Because your sex is your primary sex. I mean,
because this will probably make some trainees mad at me, but I don't believe that really makes it a vagina.
Yeah, it's not.
And it's a lot of money and a lot of risks to get an imitation vagina. And I just don't know if I want to risk that.
But so then how can you say that you have sex dysphoria if you have a strong aversion to, and to even changing?
Because I get it more over my face. I get it more over my body shape. I get it more over things people can see and react to. People aren't generally looking at my crotch all day.
So it's about how people, and this is where my thing. So before this, I like binge watched your channel. I tried to and I sort of, well, I couldn't find, I guess, did Shape take down the interview with you?
No, it's just back there a little while. It's in there. It's back there. It was a while ago when we did the interview, and then we did a couple of podcasts together.
Well, you had one recent video where you were talking about, you're like, listen, I'm tired. I was, I kind of got sucked into the gender critical movement, and I was really toxic for a while. And I was saying a lot of, spewing a lot of hate against my own community. And I realize I'm done with that. I want to come back. I want to be a part of my community. I don't want to, hurt people who I love. I'm T for T. You said that you're trans for trans, you have a relationship with another trans identifying male, and and you kind of like apologize. You're like, I know that I've alienated a lot of people that I love, and I've sort of blocked myself from having these fulfilling relationships that I would have been able, that I've sort of pushed away because of this hardcore sort of TERF gender critical rhetoric. And that's where I'm saying it's the sort of, and no offense, but it was like, the incel to trans pipeline. I don't know that you fit into that, but it's like this idea that, these men who, again, are maybe like either feel like they're less desirable, or don't get the sort of, men don't get the sort of sexual attention that women get in period, because men are supposed to be ones that go out. I mean, and I'm talking about from like an evolutionary psychology standpoint, women are sexually receptive, men go out. I had some gay guy the other day, he's like, well, that's not always true. No, the anus is not a sex organ. Sexually speaking, your primary sex organs, the penis, it penetrates stuff. Okay, women, vagina, we're receptive, right? So again, the fact is, most men are going to chase women if we're talking about from like a heteronormative, perspective, which is the vast majority of people.
Right.
And so a lot of these men feel disenfranchised because they're like, oh, I'm not. You see I'm not getting any attention. We're all chronically suffering from loneliness. I think that's a pretty ubiquitous thing. A lot of people feel lonely. We feel disenfranchised. We have more connectivity than ever before, yet we feel even more dejected than ever before. And it's this kind of feeling that, well, now as a woman, now I'm getting attention. Now I'm getting affirmation. Now I'm having, increased sex partners. I have an increased access to people who, want to engage with me socially, sexually, romantically, whatever. And you've got to understand whether, you'll agree to that or not, or admit to that or not. And I certainly see it in other people, and I'm not going to pin it onto you, but, only you know the truth to that. But how the fuck is that fair that we now have to just sort of reorganize, our rights that we used to have to fight for? Women were not in the public sphere even 100 years ago. We were at home. We were tethered, barefoot and pregnant, the urinary leash. We didn't have any public accommodations for ourselves. There were male accommodations because women were not expected to be in the public sphere. We had to fight and create those things. We had to sort of push and create movements to make sure that women had a rightful space in public society. Right. And so now all of a sudden, just because somebody's more popular and can get laid more, now that he's taking on this other persona, suddenly, our lived experiences and our needs and our everything else as women is just secondary. Don't you kind of see how that's a little like fucked?
I mean, I can see where this perception comes from. And I think it kind of also highlights another underlying problem, is that it seems like it would be so much easier if men were a certain way, women were a certain way, true trans was a certain way, and we all live these kinds of very cardboard cutout, cookie cutter lives, right? And we all kind of have these very predictable ways that that would make it so much easier, right? But the problem is that we live in reality and things are messy. And some people are gay, and some males are feminine, and some women are extremely masculine to the point that they live their life as a man, pretty much.
But know what's
the reality that we have to deal with.
What's very consistent is sexual dimorphism. You're right. All this other stuff has to do with personality and interests and stylistic choices and whatnot. Right. And again, that's the idea when you're talking about putting in effort to look like a woman. Well, what the fuck does that mean? Because my friend Sasha, who's a butch lesbian, you don't look like her, right? There's excellence. So many women who have so many different. There's always this one sort of like type that a lot of you guys go for, and it doesn't even come close to scratching the surface, the sort of broad range of appearances that women have. And one thing that we all have in common is our biological reality. And I think it really boils down to that you do not know what you don't know. And you don't know the sort of consequence of what it is to actually be in a female body. And what you're identifying with is sort of this, like, again, it's the sort of superficial, like, what people see when they see a woman right away, and that sort of, the way that they treat you and hold the door for you and compliment you and the sort of role that you get to play in society. That is, when I say the tip of the iceberg, I mean, like, literally, that's just like the sort of top layer of this shit. And that's where the frustration comes from with women, where it's like, bro, anybody can sort of perform in any of those roles, but that doesn't. And I think the reason why we've gotten so pulled away from the reality of males and females is because now we have things like birth control that came out in the 60s. We have artificial milks that came out in I think the 40s or 50s. So women aren't tethered to breastfeeding for, a year and a half. It's not like every sexual encounter could result in conception. So we need to seriously gatekeep every man that we, are around. We have to do all these like hardcore courtship arrangements and get married early to make sure that we're not stuck with these, unintended pregnancies that could really ruin our lives back in a time where we didn't have social safety nets. I always bring up in the example of the Philippines, where there is it's a very Catholic country. Birth control is illegal. So is abortion. I worked at a high volume birth center in Taytay Rizal, Philippines, which was 40 minutes outside of Manila. We would have 30-year-old, 31-year-old, 32-year-old women who would come on their 13th, 14th baby. Their uterus is prolapsing. They've been pregnant every other year since they started menstruating at like 15, 16, whatever. That's the biological reality of being a woman, and the further that we get away, because we're using this sort of transhumanistic technology, and I'm not saying that birth control is a bad thing, but I'm saying it has consequences. It makes it seem like we're more similar than we really are. But wait till the production of that gets fucked up too. The next time we have a pandemic and women can't get access birth control as easily. Watch how quickly we start to see the difference between trans women and adult human females, right? So go ahead. You had something else that you want to share. Let's segue into what else you had.
So I think something I can kind of bring that into like a point I wanted to make is just, so like you said, there's obviously a difference between women. There is differences between women and trans women that we can recognize. And there's just things I have not experienced that you experienced in life, obviously. Likewise, when you say things like trans women are men, there's things that whole ass men, they have not experienced what I've experienced. They have not experienced my life. And a lot of those men are a threat to me as well. So what this kind of brings me to is treating a class of people, kind of doing this minority report approach to it based on biological sex. It kind of comes this thing where it's like, well, we might as well just take away all the rights of trans women so they don't infringe on women. And then we might as well just take away all the rights of men. But hey, wait, there's a lot of women who are predators too. Let's just lock everybody in a cell and have a prison planet at this point. It's kind of where we could go if we keep ramping up the tension and the vitriol.
Compare the criminality of men with the criminality of women, especially when it comes
most
to
like everyone up,
is pretty insane.
Humans commit crimes, so let's just put everyone in a prison planet so that nobody can commit a crime against each other.
What are trans rights? Let's go there. What are trans rights versus, for example, trans privileges, right? What do you feel are fundamental rights?
So I think that we should be allowed to have our transition. I don't think that people should be able to.
Who pays for it?
You're probably not gonna agree with this, but I think it should all be funded by the state.
Who pays for that?
But if that's not possible, the thing that is more my priority is fighting against insurance companies trying to make exceptions. So for example, what's really important to me is that I get FFS. Okay, like people making fun of my face in the chat. You know, FFS is very expensive. Those surgeries are expensive. I think that those should be paid, and I would not have to worry about dysphoria over that so much.
So where is it at? I mean, so if you need breast implants, FFS, and again, to me, this is not transsexualism. This is transgenderism. It's the sort of gender you want to like, you know, this performative. You want femininity, right? You don't actually want femaleness, because if you wanted femaleness, you would have gotten the SRS. But it's about the femininity aspect. It's about how other people perceive you, right? Because
I mean, that goes into it, definitely. But I think part of it is actually having dysphoria is what drove me to this point. It's a vicious daily cycle that you can imagine how it feels. And that's something that even I thought I could get it to go away, desisting, detransitioning.
Do you think it's exacerbated by online communities?
Yeah, there's definitely, I think the true trans, and this is kind of something I wanted to get into, was the validation seeking hierarchy. And so when you bring up true trans, you bring up some of these kinds of like groups of the like Blair Whites and the very like seen as the more elite ones. My issue with these kinds of validation seeking hierarchies is they don't allow for nuance. It's a lot of making assumptions about people. And I think that it kind of leads to these like purity spirals where we don't even get to have these conversations like we're having right now. Like people would have, out of fear, had me not talk to you or if I was still like on the radical trough side, I'd be getting canceled for talking to you right now. On your side, you have people didn't want you to talk to me because that's not pure enough. There's a girl named Chandler on Twitter who merely disagreed with KJK, and she was then bullied by KJK's drunken wine mom friends, a biological woman. They start questioning if she's a real woman. What I think is going on is we used to fight over religion. And now that a lot of people have lost faith in religion, people are trying to create these very religious beliefs about biology, science, and they're being very dogmatic and wanting to punish people. And I think it's very unfair because when you meet somebody like me or Shape, like, I don't think I deserve the burden of just being assumed a potential rapist. I think that's very wrong for me to have to suffer severe consequences like potential R word or SA, being put through all these increased risks. Dysphoria is something like, I mean, so it sounds like to me like you don't believe transsexuality is real.
Yeah, no.
You don't believe
I mean, it's not though, because it literally, it's a misnomer in the word transsexual, transition, sex. You know, one could change. It doesn't happen. So the closest thing that we can get is somebody like shapeshifter, which is, you know, an approximation of female genitalia I mean, only external genitalia, mind you, with a little bit of like the vaginal canal, I guess. It's supposed to look like that. But genitalia also, extends to the cervix, it extends to the uterus, it extends to the fallopian tubes, it extends to the ovaries and the ova. And again, it's more just about sex, right? It's about sex with devoid from the full range of functionality that these organs have in our bodies and the impacts that it has on our lives. And then even shapeshifter of all people really laid himself down on the altar of trans, went through every single rite, got all the way to the end of the rainbow, got there and was like, well, fuck, I'm still a man. Why'd I do all this shit? It would have been better if I had just been non-binary, kept my penis. And anybody who hasn't, my top viewed video is a lot of these clips of these detransitioners who you can tell are going through this like cognitive dissonance and thinking about their transition. And some of them went all the way. And my fucking God, it is hard to watch and it is sad. It's really sad. And these doctors who, this is why I can have the conversation with you, Laura, and you're talking about, the purity spiraling and the off limits people. There's certain people that, people will say, oh, you can't talk to them. You're not the one creating policy. Yeah, you might be a billboard for, the trans argument and all this shit. I think that a lot of people who identify as trans have kind of just gotten sort of, sucked into the algorithm that starts to shape the way we see society and these online communities. And that's you guys. Yeah, you're participating and you're doing things that I highly vehemently disagree with. But this is still a top down phenomenon. We're looking at like the Pritzker family. Anybody who reads the 11th Hour blog by Jennifer Bilek is talking about the immense amount of money that's coming from families like Pritzker into the ACLU, into American Medical Association. And there's this, because there's in the Pritzker family has a trans identified male who is like very well connected, has a lot of wealth, and does a lot of trans philanthropy where we wonder, oh, why did the ACLU suddenly seem like it's captured? That's why. Right. And I think that the broader issue is really it's transhumanism. Because what happens when we sterilize all the children, when we give them the Lupron, which is puberty blockers, followed by cross-sex hormones, which we know results in sterility 100% of the time. Well, when they finally get of age, when they were like, oh shit, I actually do want a family. Well, what are they going to do? They can use big fertility technology. Every child who begins transitioning as a child is likely to make be worth about $1 million in terms of all of the medicalization that they're going to need and be medicalized for life. Look at Shapeshifter. Shapeshifter's like, I don't even know what to do because I can't make my own hormones. I can't decide if I want to get back on testosterone or stay on estrogen. And we know that these exogenous hormones, I have to be on them because I had cancer. I take exogenous estrogen. I can only do it for about 10 years before my cancer risk starts going through the roof. And we get put these girls in menopause at age 17. So what, by 27, they need to now just be totally off of everything? No. And then the whole hope is that we're going to get more and more dependent on medicalization, and that big tech can start to have a bigger role in our reproduction. And once they have a role in our reproduction, then it begs the question of like, well, it's the total disintegration of the family. Well, then who really gets ownership of these children? Who really gets is it the people who grew them in the lab? What happens to the kids that the people decide they didn't want to pick up? I think that you guys are being used for something bigger. I think that what's it called, Joshua Moon, who is the founder of Kiwi Farms. He has Mad at the Internet, which is on, I think, Rumble or Odyssey or something. It's a podcast. And he talks about it being a rat king. And unfortunately, I think that you guys, in a lot of ways, you end up suffering from a lot of this because you guys are, unfortunately, for whatever reason, you're more vulnerable to sort of, the marketing of this whole thing. And you end up kind of becoming like a billboard for it. And some of you get pushed down these really dark paths. And before you know it, you wind up like Shapeshifter And it's really he's a eunuch, and it's sad. Human sexuality matters. It's our ability to connect with people that we love, to build families. It's fucking sad, and that's why I can have conversations with you guys, because yeah, I don't agree. I think that you need to stay the hell out of women's bathrooms. I think you need to stay out of women's private spaces and respect women's privacy and all that sort of stuff. But I know you're not the one single-handedly creating this. You know what I mean?
Yeah, the rat kings I'm very familiar with. Something that I was thinking is that, like, so you mentioned like these very staunch, just removed from reality kinds of policies and stuff, and these pressures that are put on you to validate everybody. Don't even question self-ID, stuff like that. Very removed. Like, you have these rat kings that are the ones who push that stuff, right? Like, they really push that. You'll have the conversation with me. I'm more reasonable, right? And here I am, in between jobs, not making a lot of money. So there is definitely, that rot from the head up. But you mentioned Shape again is a great example. So Shape, did all these things to be valid, to move up the hierarchy on the trans side, and is very, could have stayed on that side, been considered very valid and passing and accepted and everything. But Shape was pressured into a lot of things that he shouldn't have done. He probably should not have gone bottom surgery. Probably messed his life up really bad. He probably could have been happy without that.
Of course. Anybody, of course. I mean, they're fucking terrible. That you got fistulas. You're shitting out of this whatever pocket that you made. It's so riddled with scar tissue. I don't know if you saw the recent on TikTok. There was this young. He's like 19. He's been this TikToker. He has like, the micro braids or whatever. And he, of course, surprise, needs a fucking, revision surgery after he got this, penile inversion. And now he's like, oh, it's okay. We figured it out. I had vaginal stenosis, which again is a misnomer because you don't have a vagina. So you don't have vaginal stenosis. You have stenosis of your, penis pocket that you made. And I guess had to remove that and then resection this part of his sigmoid colon that, is sort of self-lubricating because it moves stool, but they're able to like resection a part of it to use it as like a fuck pocket. But then again, he's removing all of his erogenous zones. You know what I mean? Every part that at least I know Shape has said that he's able to still orgasm sometimes. I know this kid probably never will again. The same way that kids who are given Lupron prior to Tanner stage 2, Dr. Marcy Bowers, who was one of Jazz Jennings, top trans medicalists, top doctors, who's a trans-identified male himself, admitted that children who are given Lupron, which is puberty blockers, prior to Tanner stage 2, are almost ubiquitously, in his belief, that no child who has been given Lupron prior to Tanner stage 2 will ever experience an orgasm. That is fucking evil. Genevieve Gluck is in the, and again, Genevieve Gluck, who I just saw, is in the chat right now, who, shout out to her, is like one of my biggest fucking heroes in this movement. She founded Redux with Anna Slats. She's based on attracted persons. And I mean, she has been going hard, uncovering these conflicts of interest. So again, and Laura, when you said that the definition of a transsexual is somebody, this is what I heard in Holly's space, is that it's somebody with a diagnosis, a gender dysphoria diagnosis. Well, how can that be the standard when in Canada you can literally, as a practitioner, be arrested and de-licensed if you do anything other than affirm people as being gender dysphoric? You can't tell somebody that they don't have gender dysphoria. So as long as they get in the car and they drive over and they make the appointment, they show up on time, they sign the forms, they're walking out with a gender dysphoria diagnosis. So that's not a good standard.
No, I agree. That's not good at all. And I'm not in favor of that.
And just to make,
but I also don't think having dysphoria makes you true trans. My definition of trans is someone who transitioned.
But anybody can, you know what I mean? Because we know how committed predators are to accessing their prey. I mean, there was the one man who was in prison. Look at Demi Minor. He was a man all the way through, suddenly he's facing 30 to life because he murdered his You know, this is a guy in New Jersey.
Yeah, fuck him. Like, straight up fuck him. He can burn in hell. Like, I don't care what happens to these predators. These predators that ID into being like trans ID to take advantage and commit their heinous crimes. They don't deserve pronouns. They don't deserve anything.
But that
Let them
doesn't
rot.
make any sense though, because here's the thing, right? Here's the thing. A woman who murders her children is still a woman. The idea that you can take away someone's trans badge just because, oh, we don't like them anymore and they've fallen outside of favor of society. It was like the Blair White and Jessica Yaniv thing. It's like, yeah, I get it because he's a scumbag, but you have this like dumpy, ugly, you know, Jessica Yaniv. But what's to say that there's not some predator? How many good-looking predator? What about what was Ted Bundy was sexy? There's a lot of women who were down to fuck him. I'm sure
it kind of comes down to, should we just lock up all males then, I guess, since we can't trust males in society?
No, we should maintain sex segregated society and not put the burden on women to be the protective custody of mentally ill and you know, vulnerable men. And again, I think it's fine. I think if men want to perform femininity and if it gets them the sort of like social access that they want, if it helps them find the relationships that they want. I wear makeup. I'm wearing it now. Rad femmes give me shit every fucking day. Do you know how many times I've had to sit there and go one-on-one with rad femmes because of my
already testing you.
Yeah, and like,
yeah.
Bro, I'm 35 fucking years old. I'm not about to change now. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
That's a performance, though. That's a performance. And why do I perform femininity? Because I like to fuck men. You know what I mean? And I tend to get more attention from men when I do like some extra shit. But it really has nothing to do with me being female. That's the point. We can't identify out of being female. No one can strip us of our femaleness just because we did something that society doesn't like. And when we're talking about the sort of transsexual versus transgender, it's like, what do we just have to take your guys' like words for it that you're like the legit, sort of like the maps, like and this is not to say, listen, there was another thing that like in Holly's group, everyone was saying that we were like accusing you guys of being predators. That's not the point. I mean,
it feels like we're being lumped in with them pretty directly. I say the way, if you want me to explain why I would take transness away from a predator is that I don't care about that person at all. And a person who commits an act of predation deserves nothing but disrespect. Why do I owe pronouns or recognizing or affirming anything? I will treat them like garbage because they deserve it. It doesn't really matter the true trans at that point. They committed that kind of a heinous crime. I feel like, again, it's like, all I said is like, when it comes to the bathroom issue, this is kind of how I fundamentally feel about it and explained about it. But we keep bringing up these topics like prisons, the spas, sports, these things where I said I agree with you. I've lost tons of friends actually taking your side on these issues. And then I ended up on the other side where I was purity tested a lot. So I wanted to ask you this question.
Sure.
So Shape followed all of these purity spirals up the true trans ladder, right? And now is on your guys' side. You see Shape as this, one of the good ones, does all these things exactly how you like. What if one day Shape decided that he was sick of the danger? Or what if the laws changed to make that more difficult for him? And he decided that he was going to look out for his safety in this circumstance using the bathroom. Is now he impure? Is now he encouraging all these predators to break into the bathroom and commit a bunch of heinous crimes because he just did that thing to be safe? At the end of the day, I think that we need third option. So I constantly advocate for. I don't want to dismantle things like, you know, sex segregation and open nude spaces. I don't want a bunch of predators identifying into women's prisons. I'm against that. But until we have third option, I don't think it's fair to us that if we have to work a job somewhere or something, that we're told that we have to go take this very risky, like we're just a working class citizen, haven't broken any laws, haven't done anything wrong. That now we have to change, we have to take this extra burden. Transsexuals have used the spaces that they look and are safer using for decades and decades. And now you want to take that away from us. And you have these purity testing, you know, standards, objectives for Shape to meet, that if he falls out of, he's canceled, he's done, he's on the other side. And I guess what I'm saying is, like, where is it just good enough that now, like, me just trying to survive, I'm not enabling all these predators, and I'm not just like one of these like predatorial men coming into your bathroom and do all these crimes just because I got to take a piss, girl. Like, I can't hold this shit anymore.
You don't have to be a predator. It's the fact that women are saying that we want privacy. Women are saying that we want to be around other women who have our phenotype, that we have an expectation of privacy, that that men are a threat to us, and that by allowing, once we say that some men are women, then any man can be women. And the problem is, I hear you, right? Say you're like, okay, if we can just define what is this, you know, you keep saying that, and it's not just you. It's every group of like pro transsexuals, and again, I kind of see it under like the Blair White umbrella, you know, because everyone's like, oh, it's Blair. Oh, Blair. Who would get worried about Blair? You know, Blair's hot. Blair's, you know, like this sexy, whatever, you know, cool. Like, that's not what the fucking vast majority of trans identifying males look like. And again, you have these reasonable. So when I asked them, I went into one of the spaces, Holly's spaces, and I asked everybody, and everybody was like being all like, you know, whatever towards me. But I was like, no, I'm trying to understand what they're like. It's the transgenders are the problem, and transsexuals have always existed. And, you know, it's the transgenders who come and just self-identify. I'm like, okay, well then what's the difference? You know, is it somebody who's had SRS? Because again, it's transsexual, you'd assume that they're having a sex reassignment. I was like, oh, well, no, that's dangerous and bad. I was like, okay. And I was like, so then what? Like somebody who's really putting in the effort, somebody who's really trying. And okay, well, somebody who's had a gender dysphoria diagnosis. And I brought up Genevieve Gluck, who was in the chat earlier. Genevieve Gluck, who has been working to expose the conflicts of interest, the WPATH, which is the like, what is it, the World something of Transgender Health, the World Association. They're the ones who give the recommendations that a lot of these, you know, health bodies follow in terms of, you know, the recommendations in terms of, you know, transitioning kids and adult transitions and stuff like that. They have conflicts of interest where there are people who are contributing or you know, a part of writing, who are part of the WPATH, who are helping to influence things like the DSM, the Diagnostic Criteria Manual, you know, for diagnosing things like gender dysphoria, who are then on the eunuch archives, which is this like weirdo site where these guys get together and they fantasize about having somebody cut their penis off and like eat it. And they have like hundreds of thousands of like, you know, written sort of, you know, fantasy writing about, I mean, from everything from like bestiality to you know, sex with children. And I mean, really the worst of the worst, but it's fantasy. So it's okay, right? Men who are involved, and the eunuch archives, the reason why I think Genevieve Gluck was able to, you know, tap into this, because they, like I said, she's an expat with the US. She's based out in Japan right now. They have their annual meeting out in Japan. These are the guys who are giving the recommendations for the DSM, the DSM-8, the 8th edition of the diagnostic, you know, criteria, the manual that we use to diagnose things like this, was contributed by people from the eunuch archives. And again, these are men in high places. These aren't just a bunch of slobs who sit around and jerk off in their mom's basement. A lot of these men are very well connected. Okay, these are they decided to add eunuch as a gender identity. This is where this starts to spiral off. So the whole idea that, okay, well, we can tell that a transsexual is legitimate is if, and this is what I asked in Holly's group, and these are the responses I got. Well, okay, transsexual has a diagnosis of gender dysphoria. Well, Kat Kattinson told us that she went to one appointment with a gender therapist and walked out with a prescription to test with testosterone and a diagnosis of gender dysphoria. We know that Isaac from Cluniac, or Isaac Uncooked, talked when he confronted his gender therapist, she admitted that she's basically reading off a sheet. And when he confronted her and said, do you actually know what you're talking about? Have you read any of the studies? She goes, well, I haven't read the studies, but I've done a training workshop where I learned about this kind of stuff. And when he said, do you realize that this ruined my life, that you affirmed me when I was in a state of near psychosis and I was so mentally ill, and you told me to keep going for it, you know, that you failed in your capacity. And she basically flipped it around and darboed the fuck out of him and made it seem like it was his fault, like he should have known better. That's not gatekeeping. When we have a policy where you just affirm the fuck out of anybody who walks through your doors, that's not gatekeeping.
Right.
So I still don't understand, how can we say that, okay, we can feel safe with this group that is taking all these special steps and to prove that they're legitimate. It's, again, it sounds a lot like, you know, the MAPs who take all these oaths and promise. And again, I'm not saying that, you know, you guys are predators by any means, but I'm saying if there's a group that is dangerous and they can use this as a Trojan horse in, they're gonna fucking use it. I just don't understand, like.
So, okay, so there's a lot of issues now, and we just keep stacking these issues up, right? And this is kind of what I'm getting at with like the purity testing and the purity spiral. Like, not very many weeks ago, I was quietly using third option, holding my piss all day and getting what felt like a urinary tract infection. And I finally got sick of it. And one of the things that really tipped me over the edge was I was telling Kelly Cadigan, because she was doing this thing, I'm going to use the women's bathroom, neener. And I was like, hey, Kelly, why don't you use your big platform? Instead of doing this taunting the other side thing, why don't you advocate for third option and single use? So then I got dogpiled by Karen Davis's following, telling me all sorts of horrible things, how I'm a predator. And it dawned on me that over these years that I've been so pure, trying to go along with what GCs expect of me, just to be treated with some decent humanity, not to be seen as like a fiendish, disgusting, pricey people saying I'm such a predator for the things I've said here. It's just so over the top. I've said in the pen, like, I'm against kids being given Lupron. I prefer that they wait until 18 or 21, but I also don't want them to die. I also know that if we let the other side make all these laws, it's just, you know, slowly, eventually they're going to ban transition to 25. Now, you know, Cozy Parker, she wants to ban all of us from transitioning. So it's kind of this slippery slope, this purity testing thing. And so my question for you is kind of like, you see Shape as one of the good ones doing all these things, but if Shape then made this decision for his safety, compromised on this purity spiral, these standards that are so like testing to make sure that you fit all the boxes, and it has to be nice and neat, but life is more messy, right? Like, my question is then Shape, so Shape falls out of purity. Is then Shape responsible for these predators identifying into women's prisoners, these spa freaks slashing their wang, just because Shape didn't want to get sexually assaulted in the bathroom one day, working a job where they have to go there every single day?
I just think it seems like male violence is a problem. Male violence is absolutely a problem, and I think we can all agree on that. Women are not protective custody. The woman's room is not protective custody for vulnerable men. Shapeshifter is a man. Shapeshifter might be a vulnerable man. You might be a vulnerable man. I don't know.
Do you think that
not the
responsibility? What if Shape goes to Florida and goes to and is in a public building and has to go to the bathroom, and then his choices are this: he goes in the men's room where his safety is more in danger, but then maybe he's scared. Maybe he sees a big ass dude with a beard go in there and he doesn't want to go in there with that guy. And then he goes and uses the women's restroom, and now he has to go to a prison where he's now physically in danger because he didn't want to fall out of purity. He didn't want to be blamed for these predators that are trying to take advantage of self-ID. He didn't want to fall out of purity with, you know, your, basically the way I see it is this purity spiral of the trust.
There's a man who decided to make extreme body modifications. No one made him do it. No one told him to go get breast implants. No one told him to invert his penis. I'm very sorry that he did, you know, and it works out in certain ways because I think that he's able to get the sort of social clout and romantic attention that he wants, and which is the case with people like Blair White. But again, being a woman is about more than just being, you know, a collection of body parts.
But I hear that, and you've said that. But my point is that on the trough side, I'm sorry, but on the TRA side and the very stringent GC side, it seems to me like these are two cults. One is treating gender like a sacrament, and the other is treating biological sex like a sacrament. And if you fall out of purity on either of these sides, you are canceled to hell and you are seen as a monster. What was that?
One is real and definable and observable and you know, consequential, and the other is not. That's
That's not my experience. My experience is that there's glimpses of truth on both sides, but in the two extremes, the two very purity testing extremes, is a lot of sadness and suffering and bitterness and hatred towards the other side, and there's just no solution from that.
Well,
I think that,
go ahead.
if I can just say, like, I think that this purity spiral, this purity testing on both sides, that like if you are on the trans side and you maybe criticize, like one of the things that got me pushed onto your side was I was criticizing Darren Maralger going into the WESP. I said he shouldn't do that. And I said that who gives a fuck if people misgendering Chris Chan, you know, who cares? He did this heinous crime and he's a disgusting creep. We don't owe him anything. Those two things, I fell out of purity and on very far, very pure TRA side of things. So then I started talking to Vanessa Vokey's followers when you saw me before, and
Vanessa.
so that kind of, so talking to y'all, I was unpure. I was called a Nazi. I had trannies starting to beat me up. It was really nasty, and I had someone destroyed my art. Like all this fucked up shit happened to me. And then I ended up on the other side, but then I found myself having to do this very like robotic, very controlled. I have to cookie cutter fit all these neat boxes, but life is just more messy than that. Nobody's going to be pure enough for either side of this is what I'm getting at. Nobody really is going to be pure enough. It's almost like a religious belief on either side.
Is the idea then that rather than, you know, segregating society by sex, it's almost like the men's room gets to be the more exclusive room. That's like the more exclusive, you know, it's like, and then women's, it's just like the dumping ground for everybody.
I mean, I don't want to go in the men's room. Do you?
No.
Right. Right. So I think a good compromise. So I think it's like this is the one issue is the bathroom, right? Where this is where I fell out of purity with your side. Because at the end of the day, I came to the conclusion, like, look, I've been torturing myself, avoiding using these spaces. And I know there's a lot of people who just won't. And I don't think that makes them a bad person for not making that puritanical sacrifice. If a trans woman is against these spa freaks and against these predators taking advantage of self-ID, I really think that should be good enough, because nobody's going to agree with everything 100%. Nothing's going to be perfect. It's going to be messy. That's how life is. This purity testing is almost like when religions like purity test, you know, their members and potential members and the people who hang out with their members. If you have one of the wrong beliefs, so I believe that, you know, it is, I believe that it's not fair to you, right? But at the same time, I don't believe it's fair to us that we take this extra risk because we don't have a third option available to us. That doesn't mean that I'm in favor of all this other stuff that you mentioned, all these other things. Or because I fell out of purity with this one thing, now I'm in favor of all these horrible, wretched things. So like I said, I can't be pure on either side. So that's why I'm here talking to you. And because I couldn't be pure enough to either side, I have people, I've had my partner, an ex of an ex threatened to murder my partner over my Kiwi Farms thread. I've had a Nazi transvestite who is friends with pedos you know, Teds. Because I know some people try to censor those words. I'm pretty like say whatever words on my channel, but there was a transvestite Nazi who started obsessing with me, tried to blackmail me and tried to extort me for Discord logs of someone that he wanted to go after. He threatened to dox all my friends. I had one of his frenemies was another transvestite Nazi who everyone suspected was a grooming ped. At the time, I actually had a TERF from Kiwi Farms named Strawberry Douche bragged to me on my timeline on Kiwi Farms that she was working with him and both of them actually, to try to embarrass and humiliate me. And it kind of, again, it's just like, it just seems like almost like religious people like cherry picking and making excuses to dehumanize and treat people like they're monsters just for having like a different point of view on like a very nuanced, very specific thing.
Well, I think that people online spiral into, especially like very chronically online people in general, spiral into weird shit. And I frankly don't have, I mean, I have 4 kids, so it's like I get in and get out. I like do some like internet shit and make some shit, and then I gotta roll. You know what I mean? Like, I'm not like, so I think one, I would maybe just unplug a little bit. And
that's what I'm doing. That's why I have to leave. But you're going to be left with more, like, if you think I'm kind of more of like the reasonable ones, maybe you do, maybe you don't. You're not going to have this conversation with me anymore. Now there's going to be the other people. They might be a little more extreme. They might be a little more rigid in some of their views. You might have to just rehash some of the things that you've already debated with other people. Like you were mentioning kind of like this true trans validation that I'm very against. You're not going to find a lot of people with the nuance to recognize biological sex, but at the same time be like, okay, like there is some people who are actually trans and some people who aren't. And you're not going to see me doing this, like pushing like true trans, you have to get surgery. Cause I know about outcomes like Shapeshifter and Richie, you know, and I don't want those things to happen. But just because I don't have this peer view, like I got to go. Like I got to make sure that my friends and family are safe and that I'm safe and that I'm not pissing people off.
Do you hear the kind of like contradiction though, a little, like, do you hear the contradiction? On the one hand, you know, you're talking about that you don't believe in self-ID and that we need standards, and that tells me at least that being transsexual means something, right? That there is some sort of standard one must meet to be trans, you know, whether it's a good person. So Jessica Yaniv doesn't make the cut. You know what I mean?
It's a fuzzy line.
But then on the other hand, we're talking about purity spiraling, and then we're talking about it's fuzzy. It's all just very abstract, and it's all like very postmodern and all this shit. And all that's well and good.
I mean, there's a lot of things like that in life that we accept as just very normal.
One thing that's not ambiguous is sexual dimorphism. You know, all this other shit is, if we need to protect other groups of people, we can do all this stuff. You know what I mean? But it's still, I just don't understand what it has to do with the definition of a woman. At the end of the day, a trans-identified male is a subset of a man. It's not a subset of a woman, period. Okay, it's a subset of a man. And if we need to expand our understanding that some men to choose to get extreme body modifications, I would say the more correct term would be a transmorphous man. Transition, morphous, meaning shape, man, because you're a man. So it's like a transmorphous shape or trans whatever.
So like a gynandromorph. They have a term like that, gynandromorph. So, but that's the thing, is like, how many people do you know who use gynandromorph, right? Like, I mean, we have to teach people these terms. Like, the whole know what trans woman means.
But it's all made up to begin with. So if we were able to push all these other terms, I'm sure we can push new ones, right? We have to push back against it. It starts from the grassroots. And the problem is why the whole trans thing, unfortunately, it seems like it's this grassroots human rights, you know, a bunch of people kind of coming in together and working together. The problem is it's a top-down thing. That's why we're pushing.
Yeah, people at the top don't give a fuck about us down here.
This is about.
That's why you don't see them promoting me, putting me on a platform to give these nuanced takes. They don't want me to do this. I honestly feel like sometimes like the things I say is being suppressed, but maybe I'm just paranoid.
Speaking of that, right? So Jennifer Bialik says it is not a human right to objectify and co-opt the sex body parts of female human beings. In fact, it is the epitome of sexual objectification. And again, I just feel like a lot of the reason why men want to take on, again, they don't want to take on the primary sexual body parts of women because we can't do that, and they know better. And again, a lot of this does, you know, they always say, oh, you know, like Bruce Jenner, when he had his Martha or whatever the fuck, whoever he had, like one of his earliest, after he came out as Caitlyn, interviews, and he was trying to explain it. He's like, oh, sexuality is, you know, who you're attracted to, and gender identity is who you are. And I think that's all bullshit. I think that there's a huge sexual underpinning for a lot of this stuff. It's a lot of sexual signaling, hence why we see these young lesbians who are becoming trans identified females, who are becoming trans men. We see people, you know, Blair White again. Blair White is this conservative, coming from a conservative background, you know, very much on the binary. He wants to appear as this like sort of idyllic, you know, woman, so that he can attract the sort of, you know, straight looking guy. I've heard other people like complain about that before. They're like, well, you know, when I was just a gay man, it's a bunch of other gay men, but, you know, I really wanted the straight guy. I didn't want the other sort of, you know, more.
So like HSCS.
Right. And that was, and when I was in Holly's space, they were all talking about how HSTS, when I asked them, I said, well, what's the true trans? And they're all trying to tell me, and none of it made sense. But the one thing that they were saying, okay, well, homosexual transsexuals are the more legitimate, you know, AGPs, who are the autogynephiles, those are the more likely to be the sort of creepy. But there's nothing to say that that's true, because I said, we know what about bears? Bears is that the term for, you know, these homosexual men who are these big, hairy, you know, like sweetheart kind of guys, who are these like big, you know, overweight, whatever. And, you know, if one of those decides to transition, well, that's a homosexual transsexual. You know, somebody like Ted Bundy, who was, you know, raping and murdering women, he was hot. He decides to transition. He could be like the next, you know, hot Blair White or whoever the fuck. But we're supposed to assume that just because he's hot, just because he looks like one of, like, you know, the popular whatever, that he's somehow, you know, safer, that he, and they were saying the way you can tell that someone's a homosexual transsexual is that they pass better, and they're taking steps to really live like the other sex, and all of this shit. And I was actually on Ariel Scarcella's Rumble channel, on her second channel on Rumble. We had a big conversation about this.
She's really cool. I like her.
Yeah, she's cool. And, you know, where we disagreed was, we were talking about, you know, Blair White's and pronouns. And I was like, well, it's a he. He's like, well, you know, I understand that. And Blair understands that. But, you know, it comes down to just courtesy and all that sort of stuff. I'm like, well, no, I think that kind of grooms children into bizarre ideas about sex. Vanessa Vokey said it best when she said that only perverts lie to kids about sex and human anatomy. And I think that using incorrect pronouns, and anything that is not a sex-based pronoun is an incorrect pronoun, you know, signals to children incorrect information about sex and sex and biology. And fuck, where was I going with that? I don't remember. But let's see. So the whole homosexual transsexual thing versus you know, the AGP thing. And I don't think that they're even all that much of a world away apart, because, you know, maybe where it's like for AGPs who, you know, kind of have this like internalized thing where they get turned on and imagine, you know, being with a woman that is like themselves and experiencing that when they put on, you know, women's underwear, and it's, you know, it's exciting. But then it's like, you know, homosexual trans, again, it's about sexual signaling. It's about being able to attract the sort of partner that you want. And to say that that's not an aspect, I think is insane, and it's wrong. And I think it reveals a lot of the misogyny of homosexual men. Again, just seeing women as a conglomeration of body parts. Well, who was the one guy who said that femaleness can be, the anus is the body part through which femaleness can be accessed by all people? It was some psychopath from like queer theory in academia. It's disgusting. It's all just like some, like, you know, cum dumpster receptacle, and that just being a woman is that you just get fucked. You know what I mean?
It's like fetishy sounding, right?
Yeah, that we're a conglomeration of body parts, but you got to understand, it's also misogynistic to say that just because, you know, you've sort of taken on this sort of appearance of some secondary sex characteristics, that makes you a woman. That's such a misogynistic view, that we're just this sort of superficial form and the performance of femininity, when it's not. You know, I could go into what my experience as a woman has been, from having had 4 children, you know, from you know, my own rapes, from having had a gynecological cancer that only women have, that had gynecological impacts that only women have. I was in menopause at age 33. I'm at increased risk of dementia. I have to take exogenous hormones for a female condition because, again, sex has greater consequences for women. STDs are because they're inside our body, because we have to take things into us. We take in, the male excretions and male organs and all these other things. It has greater consequence. We bear the reproductive burden of the species. That's why women must gatekeep sexually, because to conceive with a man changes our life forever. A man could have 100 children by 100 women and abandon all of them, and it had no impact on his life. He never even has to meet them. He could have just impregnated a bunch of people and never even known about it. Go and make his money and live his life. A woman cannot conceive a child and just not deal with it. Could just walk away and be like, fuck it, I don't care. No, it has a life-shattering impacts. Whether she chooses to get an abortion, for a lot of women, that's such a psychologically traumatizing experience. And I don't care what femmes say, it is. You know what I mean? To rip out something, your body that you're so hardwired to want to protect with your life. These are not
something I wouldn't understand. Like, yeah,
right.
But it's just people say, like, me having done these things, now I'm wearing woman face, I should take it off. So, like, I have to go get surgery. I have to go and, like, change how I present.
I don't agree with that.
It's very anti-GNC. Like, men have to present a certain way. We have to follow the gender norms and stuff. Like, this kind of starts to seem kind of aggressive to me. My thing is this, and this is kind of where I was, and it's funny that we're back here, after all this time, and you'd see me on responding to ASTFxx, was I went from being a trans activist where I get really angry at people misgendering me, finding their ideas offensive, and I wanted to finally stop being mad at the internet all the time and just talk to people. And I got to this point where it's like, okay, so the way you see it as trans women or men, that's what you believe. I respect that that's what you believe. I don't want to compel your speech. Likewise, like myself recognizing all the biological differences, making all these exceptions, and very nuanced understanding, I have this perception that trans women are women, a type of woman. I could be more specific. We have these two different beliefs. We can coexist without necessarily having the same belief. And I think what's good is, like, I don't try to compel you and you don't try to compel me. There's an understanding of all these nuanced things. It's not just, oh, well, you're this type, so we assume that you're exactly like this. You're like this type. And you mentioned the typology, the Blanchard typology, and I definitely know a lot about it, and I don't disregard it. However, one criticism that I've received is that I might rely on it too much.
Do you want to explain for people, because we have 200 people in the chat, why don't you just explain a little bit? I know.
Wow. Well, hey, I know a lot of you probably don't like me, but thank you for coming.
No, there's people in here defending you. We got
okay. I've seen a couple of them, but I recognize who they are.
What's up, chat?
It's okay. Like, this is the point, Mike, I tried to take in the beginning, is like, free speech should be protected. I hate getting censored. I know you hate getting censored. It makes the internet fun that you'll be saying things and you take shit to write things in this context that's understandable. And then you're banned for saying some stupid little joke comment. And then you're, or then you've got these people who are taking advantage of the platform with socks saying all sorts of abusive things that frustrate you. And so I think it just kind of pushes people to those more extreme views, these kinds of nuanced conversations that are more responsible, I would say, just like more grown up. Like, I think this is kind of where we need to go if we want to build bridges instead of go to war with each other, because I don't want that division. I don't want people who are GC, who are reasonable, to be assumed to be like friends with Nazis and wanting to put us all in camps. But if it's more and more common that purity is insisted on and it's pushed more harshly, then that's what's going to be left, because the reasonable ones are going to leave your group. The reasonable ones are going to leave my group. The reasonable ones are going to leave the scene, and you're going to have the two extremes fighting it out. And that's kind of just the pattern that I keep seeing with this stuff, is that there's all these little things where we agree, but somebody falls out of purity and now they are responsible for all the crimes of the other side. It's very dogmatic. It kind of reminds me of like people fighting over religion. And that's why I think it is kind of linked to that, this change in our technology and this change in our understanding of ourself, where we're learning, you know, where we're trying to understand ourself and our meaning in the universe beyond just the Bible says so. Right. And we're learning so much of ourselves, and it's very dangerous. There's all these technologies popping up with AI. You have people at the tippy top who they want population control, right? They want less population. They have their own agenda. And if it was up to them, they would have an AI run society and they would just have less people because it's more convenient to them, right? These are people way up top and they have these very just absolutist views and way too much power. I don't think that if somebody in our class, I see a class struggle, that we are in the same class financially, in the working class in society, where the people above us, they want us to fight. They want us to be like, you know, how you go to a protest and there's Antifa and Nazis showing up. People got their guns.
I do agree that people, I do agree that, like, you know, petition stuff benefit when we're fighting with each other. I mean, I definitely think a lot of this is engineered, but yeah, it's just, yeah.
By design.
Really quick, I'm going to pick, I'd ask people to send in questions.
Oh, yeah.
And if anybody in the chat wants to ask like a question that we can both answer, we can both answer it with like a quick statement. Do you want to do that? Let's see. All right, okay. Let me ask you a question. You said something about like you don't want to see kids medicalizing, but then you said you also don't want to see them die. What is your, you know, and then you think that, you know, transition should be covered. So is your view that if kids don't transition or people can't have access to surgeries and transition, then what happens?
So I don't think that kids should be getting surgeries under any circumstances. I think for anybody, getting surgery right when you turn 18 is a bad idea in general. I don't believe that Lupron should be given out to suppress puberty. I think Lupron is bad. I do fear, though, if we try to ban Lupron, that they're going to try to do stuff like ban transition 25 or ban it entirely. But I'm getting off subject. My stance is that I think the 18 to 21 range is a good zone where it's like you're the age of consent. You're young. If it's and I speak in the context a lot of male to female transition because I think that the two are very different, and I've experienced male to female. So for me, I think 18 to 21 is about the range where you'll get good results, and it's like they've had time to think about things. They're not rushing it really young, and it's not too late.
Abel Garcia was an adult. Kat Cattinson was an adult. Shapeshifter was an adult. You know, Isaac.
I mean, so do we just not let adults make their own decisions? Like, what do we do other than let adults make?
I think that adults can make their own decisions. I think that we have a response. I think doctors who take an Hippocratic oath, who are performers, have a responsibility to gatekeep medical procedures from mentally ill people. It's not so much that I would want to stop people from, you know, doing what they want, but we don't just let people walk up to a doctor's office and just make demands on, you know, I want to cut my spleen out for no reason. I want to cut my kidneys out for no reason. And then they just acquiesce to it. It's like, it's the example of people who feel like they don't identify with their like arm or their vision.
Yeah, it's like a little different, I feel like. But you know, it's like requiring somebody to have dysphoria and prove that they have a mental illness, but then they have to prove that they're mentally well. So it's like, can't win kind of thing. It's like finding, and again, we kind of come to this thing, like, and this is one of the reasons why I left the GC is because like, even though there's all these places I feel like in great, first of all, these like hate comments, reading this every day for 2 years got really old. and I don't have to deal with that anymore. But, you know, I feel like on the GC side, all y'all want to do is just take things away from us, and we get nothing. We get hosed. We get everything that we're willing to give to you just taken away. And that's what I don't want. Like, and that's why I kind of am like, honestly scared of your movement. Like, I just want my life. I don't want to bother anyone. I want you guys clawing into my life to find things that you can do to make me unhappy and try to make me feel guilty about stuff that I didn't even do.
What are your thoughts on this? So this was a long-term follow-up of individuals undergoing sex reassignment surgery. And again, you say that you don't want sex reassignment surgery, and that's fine. But a lot of people who identify as trans vehemently want sex reassignment. And you said, as you said, you know, they're mentally ill and they really believe that it'll alleviate their dysphoria if they have this sort of, you know, genital, it's not a sex reassignment surgery, that's a misnomer, a genital appropriation cosmetic procedure. So I just want to read this study's long-term follow-up of individuals undergoing sex reassignment surgery, somatic morbidity and cause of death. This is by Gert Martin, Alitis Kurtenston, and this was published in Sex Med. All right, it said, of 98% of all Danish transsexuals who officially underwent sex reassignment surgery from 1978 through 2010, 1 in 3 had somatic morbidity and approximately 1 in 10 had died. The average age of death was 53 years old. So the life expectancy is, it was the life expectancy was 53 years of people who had these reassignment surgeries. Overall, 19.2% of the sample were registered with somatic morbidity before sex reassignment surgery and 23.1% after sex reassignment surgery. In total, 8.6% had somatic morbidity before and after sex reassignment surgery. The most common diagnostic category was cardiovascular disease, affecting 18 individuals, 9 before and 14 after sex reassignment surgery. 5 of those 14 were affected after sex reassignment surgery, had it after sex reassignment surgery. 10 individuals died after sex reassignment surgery at an average age of 53.5 years, male to female, and 53.5 years from female to male. So, you know, this, again, the reason why we gatekeep medical procedures, right, it is for this reason. And then there was another one that I think
Can I say something about really quick is that so that's why, so you see why I think pushing true trans validation based on getting bottom surgery is very harmful. And these kinds of statistics are saying to me, and having friends like Shapeshifter and Richie, like, really made me think, like, God, I'm glad I never got that and probably never will, because you can have all these complications. Like, I've criticized the bottom surgery a lot, and I've been told to the point that it's like I'm pushing to take the choice away from people who might want it. I don't want to take it away from them to make that choice, but I do really like raise caution around this like idea that you have to get bottom surgery to prove that you're valid. I think that's harmful.
It for people who want it. You just said that we shouldn't be gatekeeping you know, medical procedures. You might want it, but do you think that there's any sort of responsibility or onus on you know, surgeons or medical professionals to
with any sorry,
because you just said that that's one thing that you're afraid of happening, is that you don't want, I mean, and again, you're assuming that you're completely cognizant to make, you know, your own decisions about you know, whatever. I mean, it's not sex reassignment, it's sort of a sex, you know, approximation or imitation, these sort of procedures.
It's a tough choice, right? Like, that's not an easy choice. Like, that's a big choice, and I think that's like the important part. It's not like a small choice.
What, to get this stuff done?
Yeah, so it's their whole life overhauled. Like,
right.
They say trans women are men. It's like normie men don't experience the same things that trans women do, especially those of us who transitioned at like 21 or younger. It's just our life doesn't end up the same. So like, I don't experience the same things you did.
all the way if the standard is that you just got to take some hormones. And, you know, when I was talking to my ex-boyfriend who's upstate, and he's the one that I do all the interviews with.
Well,
And
this is why you have bottom surgery regret, because they feel like they got to prove to you that they're pure enough and that they're valid enough that you're not going to bully them and try to treat them like they're a predator. I have been called a predator so many times in this chat. I have never predated on anyone. That's just made up. And this is this purity testing bullshit I'm talking about.
Yeah,
you know?
guys.
It's like, why would I want to be treated like that? And they can say whatever they want. Actually, I like when people say what they want, because then it shows who they really are. Right. But that's what I'm saying is, like, I was pure as fuck with you guys for years. And I just don't really like the idea of that, because, you know, there's this burden with, you know, trans women has for the longest time been allowed to use women's restrooms, that now, because now all of a sudden there's this trans hysteria going around that now I have to go put myself in danger and other trans women put themselves in danger. That doesn't feel right to me.
That it's evil. Sorry. You're saying that it's evil for us to want to, you know, to limit the access to these medical procedures, that's wrong, that as you, in your own words, that adults should be able to do what they want with their bodies, and the standard should not be that they're mentally well, because the point is they need to alleviate their mental illness, right? But and you're saying what, in, you know, from your experience, that, you know, you understand that you don't want to get sex reassignment surgery, but you got to understand it has been packaged and sold for a long time that the reason that we've even developed genital surgeries is because they were so important, that it was so life-saving, and that's why we've got to have Medicaid pay for it, you know, nearly upwards of $100,000. I know in Washington State, they allow for $100,000 worth of medicalization per trans person under Medicaid. I
mean, I think all cosmetics should be free for everyone, personally. I just think giving it to patients, and this is with a lot of things, like insurances will cover things like injuries that will have like a cosmetic value to them because of an injury. Personally, I'm for abolishing the cosmetic and entire validation hierarchy based on cosmetics entirely. I think that cosmetics should be free for everyone, and we wouldn't really have to worry about this problem. I don't think you should have to be a rich person just to live without dysphoria.
All anybody has to do is say that, you know, they're gender dysphoric and they want to get some surgeries. And again, I truly believe that a lot of people, the way that these things are being marketed and the way that you have these, you know, supposedly trustworthy medical associations that are selling these as, oh, you know, this is just how it works, and this is what you get, and this is sex reassignment. All these misnomers, these very misleading, gaslighting terms, because it's not sex reassignment surgery, vaginoplasty. You need a vagina to have vaginoplasty. Okay, you know, phalloplasty, which I guess is more accurate because it's just phallic-like thing. But again, if we want, you know, ubiquitize and democratize access to this, so we're talking like that. This is what I'm talking about. I just see the contradiction, because on the one hand, we're saying, okay, there's a difference between transsexual people and transgender people, and the difference is that transsexual people are taking extra steps to medicalize it, and transgender people, I guess, aren't. But at the same time, you know, so it's like that's the way we gatekeep in, and people that we don't like shouldn't be called trans. Like Justin Yaniv and these other predators, we can take away their trans card, but then we don't want a purity spiral.
Who cares about their trans card if they're rotting in jail? Like, fuck their trans card, like put them in prison.
We want to access, we want people to be able to, like, you know, access surgeries, but then at the same time, we should, you know, spread awareness that some of these surgeries are horrific. Like, for example, in the long-term follow-up of transsexual persons undergoing sex reassignment surgery, cohort study in Sweden, this was where was this published? I didn't write, well, wherever I didn't write down the thing, whatever. It says the overall mortality for the overall mortality for sex reassigned persons was higher during follow-up than for controls of the same birth sex, particularly death from suicide. Again, whenever they're talking about, if you listen to a lot of, like, for example, like Nominal Naomi, who I'm going to be doing a video series. I like sometimes do like a lot of these like pro gender people, and we'll do a little video series, and I go like in depth into their work and their messaging.
I criticized her on stream once. I'm
The one
familiar.
about Domino Naomi right now, and you know, he has the very sort of like the 3 years ago sort of rhetoric that like really like gender queer, you know, anybody can be trans. It's all this
Autistic AGP Ben
like,
Shapiro.
yeah, it's like, you know, it's like all this like the really like it's a very like straight from academia, that's the gender queer theory, you know, stuff like that. And again, it's really pushing the idea that, you know, these people will commit suicide if they don't get, you know, access to it, and then talking about that, saying, oh, quoting the statistics that, oh, only 1% of people who transition regret their transition, and that detransitioners are such a tiny minority, and the vast majority of people like trans. When they're talking about the vast majority of people are happy with their transition, they're talking about the 6-week follow-up when people have barely even, who are just taking off their bandages, let alone beginning to heal, and they're interviewing them. And I explained this in one of how these spaces, or maybe it was one of my spaces. There's a reason why fraternities haze incoming members. There's a reason. It's a psychological mechanism. When you put somebody through hell to have to be a part of something, they will later experience greater feelings of allegiance to that thing. So somebody has to be hazed into becoming trans and go through a sort of hell. And then you later say, hey, are you glad that you did it? Are you glad that you're here? They're like, oh, yes, I finally made it.
Fucking
I'm
cost
so
policy.
glad. These are the very early interviews. When you look at long term, so happiness with these surgeries and happiness with these transitions and things like that initially are very high, because these people haven't had to experience the fistulas, the pooping out of the neovagina, the sort of, you know, the ongoing, you know, the women who get their breasts removed, and then, you know, they have so much fat buildup because their lymph nodes have been removed, and now they're dealing with, you know, swelling and edema in their arms, and it's painful, and that sort of phantom nipple thing where it drives you crazy. You feel like your nipples are being squeezed and you don't even have nipples anymore, and there's no way to alleviate it. It literally makes you insane. I mean, and
Yeah.
so those things haven't been realized yet, but when you look at it at a long term, and unfortunately we're going to learn a lot about the long-term consequences of these things, that's when all of a sudden everyone's to crash out. And I just want to quote this study because it matters. The overall mortality for sex reassigned persons was higher during follow-up than for controls of the same birth sex. Sex reassigned persons also had an increased risk for suicide attempts and psychiatric inpatient care. Comparisons with controls matched on reassigned sex yielded similar results. Female to males, but not male to females, had a higher risk for criminal convictions than their respective birth sex controls. And you can imagine this because you're shooting testosterone in your ass. And we know that high levels of testosterone are very closely correlated with criminal behavior and criminality.
Girl, she is poison. Keep that stuff away from me.
Testosterone is a lot more powerful than estrogen too.
Yeah,
The conclusions are.
I consider it poisonous. Like it
is. It's a
offend people saying that.
It's a teratogen. It's also a carcinogen. The conclusions were persons with transsexualism after sex reassignment have considerably higher risks for mortality, suicidal behavior, and psychiatric morbidity than the general population. Our findings suggest that sex reassignment, although alleviating gender dysphoria, which again early on may not suffice as treatment for transsexualism, should inspire improved psychiatric and somatic care after sex reassignment for this patient group. What do you think is more profitable? To help people feel comfortable in their bodies, or to tell them and sell them the idea that, yes, you have an inborn problem. No, it can't be solved. We just have to keep pushing it and going with the flow. We know that children who express sort of incongruence with their gender early on, if they're socially transitioned, they're tenfold more likely to medically transition. For children who aren't told that they're trans, who aren't socially transitioned, somewhere between between 85 and 98% desist. It's when we tell them, yes, you're trans, and we sit there and this universal affirmation. Why are we telling medical professionals that they must affirm people. Why? Because each and every transgender person or trans identifying person, especially beginning in childhood, is worth $1 million to the medical industry. It's not very profitable when you can convince somebody that, hey, you know what? There was never anything wrong with your body. Go ahead and wear the dress. Go ahead and put clips in your hair. Go ahead and cut your hair short and wear the button up and wear the suit if you want to do that. Wear whatever the fuck you want. Put on the makeup. Your body's okay. Health is such a gift.
Yeah, most don't. My friend Freya even brought up a stat here. Like most report childhood dysphoria, don't grow out of it after 16. And again, like male to female, like going through dysphoria growing up, like nobody affirmed me. I was told that I'm a fag and beaten the fuck up.
But the internet sounds like the internet affirmed you pretty heavily.
Huh?
Right? I mean, the internet, it sounds
so I've criticized this. I've criticized that Big Pharma tries to create patients rather than heal them. And I've criticized how these rat kings and these big corporations do a lot of lip service for themselves, using us as like a mascot, but then they don't really care about us. So I think that's kind of a problem that we even have in the trans community, is like being more honest about the risk factors and what we're really going through in these changes. And I think, like, again, you're going to get more of that from those of us who, are just working class, like being honest, less caring about if we get canceled or whatever, rather than the people up top who have to like go off of a script and say very specific things so they don't get, canceled by their sponsors and stuff like that.
All right. I'm starting to get a little brain dead. So why don't we?
Hey, that was a lot of
kids all day. I taught my kids how to ride bikes today, and they've been just like kicking my ass, and so I'm like starting to like glaze. Laura, I really appreciate you. Why don't we do some why don't we each do like a closing statement, and then if you're welcome to do a follow-up stream with me at some point if we want it, or if you want to take your hiatus, I respect that too. Or we can like touch base. Guys, I think this whole idea of no debate is dangerous, and I think it's really important, especially like listen to what Jennifer Bialik says in the 11th Hour blog and this whole agenda of transhumanism. This is a very top-down phenomenon, and I think that it's taking advantage of the fact that we've always had this sort of gender nonconformity or whatever, a little small group of people over here that kind of did this, and it was just sort of ignored mostly by society. There's the reason that it all exploded. When I talk about a rat king is more a convergence of a whole bunch of agendas that all sort of converge, and they can all benefit from supporting the same thing, even though they have their own different interests. It's a whole bunch of interests that come together, and it's like we can all benefit from this same thing in very different ways, so we're all going to support it together. And it's just like it's a phenomenon that happens. It's because they call it a rat king, because in winter months rats will huddle together for warmth. And then sometimes, they'll stay together for so long that when they try to pull apart, all of their tails have gotten so entwined that they can't pull away. Now they're tied. Their tails are basically tied together. And they aren't assisted to be pulled apart. They'll all die that way. But that's why I call it a rat king, because it's there's so many groups that otherwise had nothing to do with each other are all kind of coming together and like, oh, hey, this can benefit all of us, so let's all team up and work together. So
that's so interesting. I always learn new stuff about that website all these years after.
Yeah. So I say all this to say that the reason why I feel like I can have the conversation with you, Laura, is because I think that it's and I say respectfully, it's heinous that you're using women's rooms. I don't think that you or any trans identifying male is any sort of subset of women whatsoever. I mean, not under any circumstances. But I can't acknowledge you as a fellow woman. I can acknowledge you as a fellow human being, and I think that I know let's all like have a big hug out.
Oh, that's so wholesome.
Oh, you know, and it's like, it's, you know, you know what I mean? Listen, I've been through real shit in my life, and
I could
and it's,
tell you give that vibe. That's something I noticed about you right away. I was like, you know what, this fish is real. Like,
I've been through shit in my life, so I know where
yeah.
the enemy lies, and I know that it's like it's all good, and we're all working through a lot of different shit, and no one person is responsible for the downfall of these are a lot bigger forces than you or me or any of us, and maybe some of us are subscribing to the wrong set of ideas and we're promoting the wrong set of ideas, but those are not the individuals who are responsible for making this happen on any major scale, you know. And you know, we all are being impacted by this in very different ways. I think trans people are being victimized in a lot of ways by how they're being targeted for medicalization, how they're being targeted for a lot of other shit, you know what I mean? So a lot
By
of people are
men.
getting by this.
By men target us, male, female, female, male. Men are a threat
Oh,
to both of us.
yeah. So my final words, I'll let you have the final statement, but my final thing is, like I said, you know, we can have these conversations. We can have hard conversations. I believe so firmly. I've always said that when I believe in something, I'm never afraid to talk to somebody who has different views from me, because one of two things can happen. Either you'll present an argument that only solidifies my position and only reaffirms that what I believe is true, and I can stand even more strongly in my position, or you'll present things to me that will poke holes and reveal flaws in what I believe and flaws in my foundation. And if I have any, you know, intellectual integrity, I'll have to take a look at it, reassess, and evolve and patch those up with the newfound truth that you brought to me to now have an even stronger, better foundation. I'm constantly evolving. I'm sure that in 5 years I'll look back at some of my stances now and be like, you know, whatever. I'm constantly open to change. I'm open to new information. I'm not afraid to talk to anybody, because you know, I believe that I can only be better, whether it's, you know, solidifying what I believe or challenging what I believe. But you know, I still believe that, again, that, you know, definition of a woman is an adult human female, that there are no men that are a subset of. That doesn't mean that we can't have conversations. Laura, when I put out saying that, you know, I wanted a trans identifying male to argue with me, not one person took me up. Everybody was like, you know, talking shit. You were the only person who was like, you know, I'll do it. And I think that that says a lot. And I think I respect that a lot. And I'm grateful. And this was a great conversation.
Thank you.
So thanks. I really appreciate you. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate all that. And at the end of the day, like, you know, you mentioned like we're all humans, and something I want to reiterate is that it seems to me like ultimately there is a class struggle, and we kind of get pushed into these little microscopic positions and stuff where we are like going through these very complex different things, and it's very easy for us to turn on each other, and the people above us really want that. And so that's kind of something really important. I think, real quick, if I can answer this question without taking too long, this is a pretty good question. Someone's asked me a few times. I know they really want an answer. APS, Laura, do you think an AGP can be happy and sexually satisfied by simply performing your male views of quote unquote femininity without trying to usurp women's biology in spaces? I believe that I won't require everyone to validate me just to be happy. But for me to be happier, if I was to pass as female and it wasn't anybody's problem or business or anything, I just go about my life, I feel like I would be a happier person. And that's part of the drive to medically transition. I want to leave there was one thing I mentioned a lot was this validation seeking hierarchy. I believe that I tried to climb the hierarchy from the TRA side over to Kiwi Farms, over to trans medicalism, over to LGB drop the T, back to trans medicalism, back to being a little more inclusive, just climbing this validation bullying the people that used to bully me. It's kind of related to that. But once you're on one of these sides and you're in an echo chamber, like being a trans activist, or you're in an echo chamber that's very hardline dogmatic GC, you know, you have to ask yourself, like, who are the good ones that you validate in your echo chamber? Are they following the requirements for the T to the T? And is that necessary? Do you consider that maybe they fear the wrath of a mob when you're making your judgments on them and you're assuming that they're going along with certain things? Do you consider maybe their fear and the life that they have to live, considering, especially if you care about that person, someone like our dear friend Shapeshifter? Do you care that if you're, you know, on the trans side, you get somebody who is just seeking validation, who might not end up happy? Or on the detrans side, you have somebody who was sucked in by the Pekin cult and made to believe that their transition was wrong for them, and then they end up how I was 4 years into detransition. If they go along with it, do you consider the fact that they know they're being used? They are feeling the suffering of abuse, but they just don't know any other way because of these extreme echo chambers. I just feel like on the TRA side, more reasonable trans people, and on the GC side, a lot of detrans and reasonable trans people are made to feel this constant pressure that they have to be perfect and walk this perfect line. And real life doesn't work that way. Real life is messy. There's a lot of fuzzy lines. I feel like they're given no hope by these extreme echo chambers. And I just want to ask everybody if they could consider maybe giving some sympathy, some empathy, being willing to view a person as not having like one black or white viewpoint of everything, that we have our experiences, these things that form our opinions very nuanced. We do suffer a medical condition. And so something I just kind of like, I'll just leave it at this, is if you go back, the one thing I really argued that might affect someone else is me using the women's space as a bathroom. And like me saying that I'm a woman is me saying words. It's my free speech. Okay. I don't think I should be compelled to out myself as a man. I don't think that you should be compelled to call me a woman or anything, or try to affirm me. At the end of the day, I just want to encourage people to, when somebody falls out of purity with your echo chamber, consider like where they're coming from, and don't just automatically assume that they're the opposite side and all these extreme things that you could pile onto them and call them all these bad names. From the left, you could be calling them a Nazi and a fascist for just, you know, having this conversation like we had right now. But on your side, you could be called like a true enabler and all these things, and be told that you're enabling all these predators, and it's your fault now that there's these like self-IDing predators and in women's prisons and in the Wee Spa and stuff like that. So if I can encourage that kind of nuance, that's really what I want to leave the internet with. Trying to understand your fellow human being a little better, and just try to get along, y'all. Like, let's just try to get along like we did right here. Neither of us got really heated at each other. And yeah. I thought it was a nice conversation. Thank you so much for doing this. I thought it was an awesome, very informative conversation. One more thing, as you mentioned, how with these conversations, you might adjust your views or be more affirmed in your views. Another thing I like to look at is sometimes we get completely new information. Sometimes we find that there's just kind of like this very unique kind of new information that didn't necessarily, so sometimes you'll get new information from the other side. Sometimes we'll both, or there will be something that comes out of the context of the conversation. Maybe we'll both realize it later. You know, we both learned something completely new. And I think that's the beautiful thing. And I think that's how discovery works. And I think it's awesome that we had this conversation. Thank you so much. And thank you, everybody. All the haters, all my stans, thank you. You're awesome. A lot of really cool people I saw and recognized in the chat. Thank you, Brittany. Thank you so much for having me.
Love you, everybody. Love you, chat. All my friends. What's up, Laura? Just stay out of women's spaces, and then we, you know, we'd all Be all good. All the rest is fucking okay.
That
I
one
really
thing.
appreciate you for taking it.
I go back to that one thing.
What? No. Stay out of women's space. No, all right. I love you guys. I gotta go and just like smoke some weed and just die for a while.
Same.
I'm like so brain dead right now. So I have like nothing to sign off with. Wow, holy shit, this was a great chat. Connie, I love you.
I love you
Everybody,
too, Brittany. Thank you.
Connie's the best. We all
Oh,
love
Connie.
you
Is
know,
it Connie?
No, Connie, Liz, she like organizes like all the lots of stuff. She's wonderful. Connie, we love you. Karen Davis, we love you. Karen can be scary sometimes. But
I'll
Karen,
say.
oh, can we just shout out Karen Davis, like shutting down like there was like some little like Looney Tune kids from like New York, and one of the most epic fucking moments on the internet was Karen Davis shutting down some like 17. She goes, "No, you shut up and let me talk." It was so good. God, it was on her old channel when it went down. I was like, God, I loved it. Connie, I love you, everybody. All right. Bye. I'm out of here. Laura, thank you so much. Like, seriously, thanks for coming on. This was an important conversation. Hopefully, it's one of the books. So, everybody, au revoir. Men, stay out and farewell. Adult human female signing out. Bye, guys.